The story takes place a few years ago when I was 12 years old and in the 7th grade. One of my friends, CJ, was bored one weekend, so he just decided to invite me to his house, and obviously I accepted. He also invited one other kid. This kid, Noah, was a big troublemaker at my school. He would never listen to any teachers, and he got into a few fights. Most notably with one of my friends where he threw a heavy rock at the back of his head. Thank God my friend survived and took him down. Also, I don't know why, but he always had an obsession with pure violence. He was a dark kid. The day CJ invited Noah over was, coincidentally, Noah's birthday. So we get to CJ's house, eat, have a bit of fun, and then we go to a lake, cause a bit of trouble like going into the sewer pipes and getting caught. We had fun on the trampoline until I almost got paralyzed doing a front flip, so we went back inside. Also, I would like to mention it was a bit cold outside as it is in the north, so naturally Noah started to get cold. We watched a movie in the basement, but Noah went to sleep in the basement guest bedroom mid-movie because, he was sick. So after CJ and I finished watching the movie, I can't remember the name for the life of me, we went upstairs, talked, gossiped, did 12-year-old stuff. After that, we had to split the bed and go to sleep. This is where the fun sleepover turned south. I fell asleep after about an hour of staring at the ceiling, probably at a crazy hour in the night, maybe 1 or 2 in the morning. I remember waking up though, feeling thirsty, so I reach over to the bedside table where I have my water bottle. Before I sit up though, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. On the far corner of the bed, Noah was kneeling on the bed and staring right at me. Mind you, he was supposed to be 3 stories down in the house sleeping. I had not heard the door open or anything like that. Hoping to not cause a scene, I just stayed down and kept my eyes as closed as possible, but open enough so I could see what Noah was doing, and it was almost pitch black in there, so there's no way he could see that my eyes were slightly open. This is when he whispers, "F you." To this day, this gives me the chills, but then I decided to drift off to sleep again. I woke up around 8 a.m., CJ was still fast asleep, but what do you know? Noah is still freaking kneeling in the same exact spot of the bed and looking right at me still. Goodbye. And just like that, after possibly 5 hours of this kid kneeling on the bed and watching me and CJ sleep, he just left the room. I was so relieved that he was gone, and I made sure not to tell anybody what had happened. This kid, he was an absolute psychopath. After this sleepover, I never talked to Noah again, but I always overheard him in class talking about how he worshipped Satan and hated God. He became more and more violent until one day he was just expelled from the school. The reason, apparently, was because he, in a fit of anger, said he would shoot up the school. I never saw or heard of Noah ever again except a rumor that he'd either gone to a school for troubled kids or was homeschooled. So, Noah, who watched me and my friend sleep for 5 hours, let's never meet again. Okay, so this was 4 years ago. At the time, I was 26, also petite and female. I worked in a small tourist town that is motor vehicle free as a licensed massage therapist. I had a client, a barrel-chested white man in his mid-40s who seemed nice, but just seemed to emanate sleazeball. Massage started okay, started with him on his back so that the last half of the massage ended with me working on his back. Pretty typical flow. We chatted a bit, and he said that he was here without his wife, just with a business associate, which does happen a lot, and he was wearing a ring. When he was on his stomach, I noticed him shifting his body a lot. Ever the person to give benefit of doubt, I figured maybe he couldn't get comfortable, so I offered more pillows and bolsters, etc., but he declined. Then stayed still for maybe 2 minutes and started up again. It didn't take me long to realize he was grinding himself on my freaking massage table. Nope. I should have just ended the session right then, but I never had anything happen like this before. Even creepier, he had this smug little smile on his face and would make a really tiny quiet sigh or moan. Like, no, not proper massage etiquette, so just please stop. He started to get more obvious, and I was grateful that Jack, our stylist, was still in the other room. Finally, I had gotten fed up, but this guy was big and muscly and intimidating, and I was a tiny girl. So I switch and start working the underside of his forearms, a fairly tender muscle, and worked medium pressure on it, and every time he would start to grind, I would put everything I had into the pressure of that tender little muscle and do a mild facial release, which can be quite painful, which was also my point by then as he was getting bolder. He would stop, and I would go back to medium pressure. He would start again, and I would go back to peeling his muscle off of his damn bone. Also a good position for me to pin him with an Aikido right pin, and he wouldn't be able to do anything to me if he tried. By the third time, he caught on to what I was doing, and he stopped. I ended the session and left the room and informed Jack how creepy he was. Jack hung out while I checked the guy out, even though he was now off the clock. Thank you, Jack. Dude comes out to pay, tips me generously, which, ick, and the whole time is staring me down with that smug-ass smile. Finally, he left and I texted my boss, and then he was blacklisted. So I leave from there, have an hour break, and walk to the grocery store where I also work. I had a shift until 12:30 a.m., and as this is a tourist town, usually only locals are in the grocery store, with some exceptions like tourists forgetting something or wanting a snack for their hotel room. So we're busy, and I'm checking people out when suddenly I feel a hand on my shoulder. I jumped and turned, and this creeper is in my checkout cubicle area, employees only, practically breathing down my neck. And I just deadpan glare at him. Before I could ask what the hell he wanted, he stuffs a $10 bill into my hand and whispers, "I forgot to tip you earlier. See you later." Then, grinning smugly and keeping my eye contact, swaggers backward away from me and leaves the store. What the hell? He full knew that he had already tipped me. Now I had a $20 tip total, and I knew he was just trying to get back at me or intimidate me for holding my ground back there at the massage salon. Furthermore, the way the windows are at the grocery, he wouldn't have been able to see me, which means he was either looking for me or he followed me. He hadn't purchased anything. The only other cashier was facing me so I could see the people in her line, which means that he came in and made a beeline directly towards me. He didn't browse because, to do that, he couldn't have come up from behind me. Also, what was with that "see you later" bit? I felt gross. I would have refused the extra tip if I'd had my wits about me, but I had a full line of customers. He'd interrupted me and completely caught me off guard. I texted my boyfriend and he came at midnight to walk me home because we don't have cars where I work. I saw the creeper one more time when I left. He was in a bar. He made eye contact with me and smiled. I was terrified to walk anywhere for the rest of the week that I knew he was there, and didn't feel safe at either of my workplaces. So, creepy dude, don't come back. Or if you do, be sure to bring your wife. I'll have a great deal to tell her. So I'm a stay-at-home mom. I try really hard to keep me and my son entertained by going out and about regularly. Unfortunately, not recently due to the current events. At the time, though, my son was 18 months old and woke up relatively early every morning. so it wasn't strange for me to be awake before 7 a.m. at the time. That day, I had planned to take my son to the museum because they had an interactive exhibit perfect for kids his age, and I knew he would love it. When he woke up, we ate breakfast, played, and laughed together. But when you're stuck inside a house every day with a toddler, there are just too many hours in the day, and I was ready to start mine. So I pack all of his stuff into the car, and we make our way there. Well, once we arrived, it was closed. Me, being the early bird that I was forced to be, didn't realize the museum didn't open for another hour and a half. We were already out, and I refused to be cooped up inside for another minute, so I decided to head to the playground to kill some time. The park is set up around a giant pond and has a small trail that wraps around it, and the playground is located on the opposite side of it. At this time, it's probably around 8 a.m., so we were the only people there. I pull up to a spot as close to the playground as possible, because lugging a kid around is hard work, and we make our way there. Since it was early, everything was soaked with dew, and I really didn't want my son getting wet, so we decided to head toward the pond to look at the ducks. As we head that way, I noticed a white pickup truck that had a truck cap with blacked out windows parked by the side of the pond. Being the mama bear that I am, and the only ones at the park, I started staring at the truck so he knew that I was aware he was parked there. After a few seconds of me staring, he started to drive and quickly stopped in the middle of the road, a few yards from where he was parked. I thought it was strange, but I wasn't completely concerned at that moment, but I still kept my eye on the truck. There was a parking lot a bit further down from the pond, but still had a visible view of it that he made his way to. By now, I was a bit creeped out, so I decided to cut the park visit short. My son was having a good time, and I felt like I could have been a bit paranoid, so I decided to take my time walking back to the car while keeping an eye on the truck on the opposite end. As we started our walk back, the truck drove off out of sight, so I let my guard down a bit, and after 1,000 toddler steps, we finally made it back to the car. As I'm putting my son in his car seat, I hear another car coming, so I look up, and lo and behold, it's the truck coming straight for my car. I didn't even finish buckling him in when I slammed the door shut and jumped into the front seat, which was thankfully open. I quickly drove off, and when I looked in the rearview mirror, the truck was stopped dead in his tracks in the middle of the road. After driving far enough for me to be sure that he wasn't behind me, I parked and fixed my son's seatbelt. I waited a second to calm my nerves and drove back to make sure the creep wasn't lingering waiting for another person. Thankfully, he was gone. It does give me chills when I think about what could have happened if I wasn't aware of my surroundings, and how easily he could have grabbed me while I was focusing on putting my son in his car seat. What I do know is that I don't stop at playgrounds when no one else is around anymore. Okay, so brace yourself for a long story, but trust me, this stuff is wild. To give you guys some context, 1, this happened to me when I just turned 18. 2, I was extremely sheltered as a child and was very shy and passive, hence my frustratingly naive behavior. And 3, I had never had any encounter like this with an older person, so I didn't know how to respond appropriately. Now I'm older and I definitely know how to stand my ground, but I really consider this the one situation which really changed my perspective on life and people in general. So my story initially starts with me, 18 female, being a guitar player of 6 years. I started in early high school and I loved to play guitar. My guitar teacher was super chill and awesome, but he was no longer able to teach me as he was moving away. I felt like I still wanted to forward my learning, so I decided to look up other available guitar teachers nearby. I didn't have a driver's license back then and my guitar case was too heavy for me to be traveling long distances for a couple lessons a week. I find this one guitar instructor who lived surprisingly close, only 4 to 5 streets away. We contacted, and he agreed to teach me. To give you guys a bit of an idea about this guy, he was a tall, slim white guy. Even though he looked a tad on the scrappy side, you could definitely tell he was strong. He would also mention how he did lots of outdoor sports. He looked to be around his early 40s, but I'm pretty sure he was actually in his mid-30s. He had these big, pale blue eyes, sunken cheeks, and he was balding, but he had a shaved head. So yes, in retrospect, he did look rather disturbing, but I didn't want to go and judge a guy by his looks at our first encounter. On the first lesson, I went to his place with my guitar, but after seeing me play, he told me he couldn't teach me because he only taught beginners, even though I told him that I'd been playing for 6 years. So for the rest of the time, we just jammed, had a chill time together, and then I left. The next day I get a text from him saying he had an old guitar book he wasn't using, and he wanted to give it to me. Earlier that day, I had a huge fight with my sister, so I was eager to get out of the house for a breather anyway. I met him at a halfway point to receive the book from him. After doing so, I said my goodbyes, but as I was leaving, he started to follow me. I was sort of confused at this point, but he just casually held conversations, so I just chatted with him on my way home. We got to my place, I dropped off the book, we played guitar for a bit and just hung out. Suddenly, he started talking to me about a waterfall near his place. I was confused because I had never heard of this place. Why would there be a waterfall nearby? I live in an urban neighborhood. He was super shocked that I hadn't seen it and insisted that we go to see it. Oh, it's only 10 minutes away, I promise. My stupid, naive ass agreed because he promised it was super close. So we headed out to this so-called waterfall, and this is where stuff went downhill. As we were walking to said waterfall, the conversation started to change. He asked what nationality I was, so I told him I was Korean. Suddenly he hugged me super hard, saying, "Oh, I love Koreans!" I was bewildered at this point, but I awkwardly let it pass. He started talking about himself, how he dropped out of high school early because he had violent tendencies. He said he threw tables at his teachers and threatened other kids. I let him talk, but inside I was starting to feel extremely uncomfortable. I'm constantly checking around the street, but then find there's not a single person nearby to be seen. He continued to ask me uncomfortable things, like if I was a virgin, and how he liked to think about classical pieces in his mind while he had sex. I wish I was lying about this, but I'm not. At one point, he picked up a flower and tried to put it in my hair. I declined and I pulled away from him. He told me that he liked flowers because he can preserve their beauty even after death. Now, at this point, I'm crapping myself. My heart's pounding. I'm terrified, but I don't know how to tell him that I don't want to go to this waterfall. It's been 20 minutes at this point and no such place to be seen. I constantly asked him where the waterfall was, and he would just brush it off, saying, "Oh, we're almost there." Eventually, after 30 minutes of walking, we get to a random bush track. I'm beyond uncomfortable at this point, and my mind is racing for any excuse not to go in. I suddenly spotted a guy coming out of the bush track, and let me tell you, I could not have been more relieved to finally see another human. I sent the guy a huge pleading look, and he seemed perplexed. He glanced over at my guitar teacher, but didn't say anything and left. My heart sank. Now, let me tell you, the guy actually wasn't lying about the waterfall. It really did exist, but who even gave a crap at this point? I'm alone in a place that I'm not familiar with a guy who is saying some really scary things. I let him walk ahead whilst behind my back I began texting my older sister to call me ASAP. My phone rang, so I answered the call. My sister was on the line saying, "What the hell is going on? Are you still with that guy? Where are you?" I just faked a wobbly smile and said, Hey, what's up? What? "Oh, you want me to come home right now? It's an emergency? Okay." Meanwhile, the guitar dude is watching me carefully. I told him that I needed to leave, and suddenly his facial expression changed. "Why?" he said in a low, intimidating way. His demeanor changed 180, no longer smiling. "Why do you have to do what your sister tells you?" His big pale eyes were unblinking. I kept insisting that it was an emergency, but he was not budging one bit. He started demanding that the waterfall is literally right there and we are so close. At this point, the bush track we had walked was sloped downward. I was wearing a pair of boots at the time, but was constantly slipping as we ventured down. It had eventually dawned upon me that even if I were to run, it was most likely that I would either slip or he would catch up to me very easily. Inside, I'm freaking out like crazy, because I honestly have no idea how to get back, so eventually I decide the best thing to do is just agree and get this over with. I weakly agree that we can see this goddamn waterfall, only for 5 minutes max, and then I needed to leave. He suddenly changed back to all cheery again, and he was leading me again down towards that waterfall. By now, I have thoughts that I might actually die here. If he were to harm me in any way, there would be no one to hear my cries. So when he wasn't looking, I started taking pictures of my surroundings, random parts of the bush track, some distant rocks, because my thoughts were, if I were to get murdered here, then maybe, just maybe, the police might find this phone and trace me. There are no words to truly express that feeling of, I am going to be murdered. If anything were to happen, would my family ever be able to find me? No one would ever suspect to look in a place like this. At this point, the sky was getting dark and the guitar guy insisted on making a fire near the waterfall. I just agreed. He made a small fire and we sat in silence staring at the flames for a bit. I heard a small sigh beside me, but continued to stare at the fire. After the third sigh, I glanced over at him, and he was staring at me straight with his huge, unblinking eyes, the flames making a disturbing shadow over his smiling face. He stayed like that for a solid 15 seconds, and then began to scoot over closer and asked if he could give me a massage. I told him no, but he then asked if I was cold and tried to cuddle me, so I stood up and said 5 minutes was up and I needed to leave. He seemed satisfied that we did spend some time at the waterfall, so he agreed to take me home. The whole time back, he was constantly nudging me and asking me why I was so quiet. I was beyond traumatized to answer. He forced his arm in mine and we linked arms all the way home. It suddenly started to rain and he just paused and forced me to face him. He then asked me if he could kiss me. For once, I looked him straight in the eye and said no. He seemed offended and asked why not. It's just a kiss, it doesn't mean anything. I told him no again and he let go. We were almost at my house, finally, before he stopped and said, "Well, this is yours." For a second I was confused, but realized he mistook my house for a couple blocks down. I just nodded and said goodbye to him. I walked in the driveway into the front door and waited until he was definitely gone before I bolted all the way home. My sister answered the door furious and demanding to know what the hell happened and why I didn't answer her 50 missed calls. I didn't even have the energy to say anything. I just went upstairs to the bathroom, took a scathingly hot shower, and scrubbed my body clean 3 times. I know this story is extremely long, but trust me, this wasn't even all the creepy crap this guy said to me. He continued to send me messages and call me, but I ignored them. He began to grow angry and demanded for his book back. I eventually told one of my friends who was mortified at what happened. She said to just ignore his calls. I did have a little comfort in the fact that he thought I lived a couple houses down, but was terrified every time the doorbell rang, as I pictured one of my family members answering it to find him at the door with a knife to kill us all. My friend had insisted on going to the cops, but what was the point? I was 18, legal age, and technically he didn't do anything illegal. After I blocked his number, that was the last I had ever heard from him. It took me another 5 years to recover from the trauma, though I never recovered completely. Okay, so sharing this story is really embarrassing because I was 15 at the time and had absolutely no self-confidence or respect for myself at the time. I was always a really awkward girl in school and never could find a boyfriend since I was bullied pretty bad and didn't get along with anyone really in my school. One of my friends suggested that I joined a dating app, so I did. I would never message anyone because I was so scared of rejection, so I just waited for people to come to me. Eventually he did. He was super charming at first. We both were super into Pokemon, My Chemical Romance, witchcraft, conspiracy theories, etc. We also both bonded over the fact that we had broken homes. The first time we met, we just talked for hours. He ended up asking me to be his girlfriend the first day we met in person, which I thought was odd, but I was a desperate kid and he seemed nice. The first red flag was a couple months in. I found a text log with him and some other girl. He was basically telling her he thought she was hot and asking if she had liked him. I was really upset, but he said he didn't remember sending that and he doesn't know why he would do that. That was the start of this constant excuse. So I forgave him and we moved on. Things were pretty happy until about 6 months in. I had gotten into some drama with my friends, and I wanted a break. He suggested we start hanging out with his friends who happened to be his only friend. Let's just call him D. D always creeped me out. His grandma was on a breathing machine, and he would still smoke in the house and set random things on fire, even though it could blow the house up. He would rob people and joke about killing others. I just tried to chalk it up to him being an edgy kid trying to act gangster, as many in my city do. One day I was over at D's house with my boyfriend and my ex, and D was acting scary as hell. There was a point where I thought my boyfriend slapped my ass, but I could tell it wasn't his hand and it wasn't him from where he was sitting. He let D do that. My boyfriend asked D for an old game system and he said, "Only if I can screw your girl." My boyfriend quickly replied and said, "No, yeah, I don't care," so nonchalantly that it made me sick. I kept saying no over and over again, and both of them tried to convince me to have a three-way. I started having a panic attack and saying I didn't want to. D just asked, "Well then can I watch?" I was shaking my head and thinking if I should text my dad to come get me. I froze up. My boyfriend just took advantage of me, but I couldn't move. After everything was done, I went home shaking. I called him and screamed at him, telling him what happened was wrong, but I still stayed. I wish I hadn't. Him and D ended up not being friends anymore because I found out they had actually had sex. The next year of our relationship was basically constant fights, mistrust, and it really started to mess up my relationship with my family and friends. They all hated him, but I was just blind to it. He was honestly terrifying. As our relationship progressed, he would tell me his fantasies of killing people, how he wished he could just give it all up and live his dream of being a serial killer. He had a really weird obsession with role-playing creepypasta characters. He told me how he got accused of touching an 8-year-old, but how he would never do that, and that his dad got him out of it. He told me how he wondered if his dad would ever get him out of things again, although he did have a horrible relationship with his dad who was super creepy in and of himself. At one point, his dad came to me begging me to believe him that my ex was trying to kill him by putting bleach on his toothbrush. Yeah, that was crazy. He had a foot fetish, which I try not to kink shame, but he would make me feel really uncomfortable and touch my feet when I didn't want him to. I resented him honestly, but I stayed with him. I don't know why, and I beat myself up for it every single day. We finally ended a year and a half in on my 17th birthday. I wanted to have a good couple of days. My dad rented out a nice room in a hotel with a hot tub. I was gonna get drunk with all my friends and have a good time. I honestly just didn't want him to come over. Our relationship was really rocky at this point, and I was starting to realize that I deserved better. But again, he fake cried and begged me to let him come. The first night was mostly okay, but he seemed really touchy with one of my friends, M. She asked if he was trying to sleep with her, but I told her it was probably nothing. I wish I listened. The second night made me open my eyes. Two of my friends that are a couple left, which left me with only my ex and M, and we were all incredibly intoxicated. M was laying on the ground with her legs in the air inebriated. I saw my ex get out of the bed, walk over to her, and suck on her toes for a second. Right in front of my eyes. I was fuming. I walked over to him, grabbed him by his shirt, and dragged him into the bathroom. I started screaming at him about how he just sexually assaulted my friend in front of my own eyes and cheated on me yet again. He was denying it at first, even though I saw it with my own eyes, until he started vomiting and I went to leave the room. He admitted it and begged me to stay. He told me he couldn't live without me and even started crying. I have never been abusive, but let me tell you, I slapped the shit out of him, and I left him in the bathroom sick so I could try to have a good rest of my night. Long story short, we broke up, and I found out he was still assaulting girls even after we broke up, which just makes me sick. After we did break up, I realized how freaking stupid I was. I was traumatized, and I honestly still am. I still have nightmares about it sometimes. In my head, when I was with him, I thought I was doing God's work. I thought I could fix him. I'm broken, so this just must be what I deserve, right? Well, I'm 18 now and in a much healthier relationship. I'm in therapy and working on all my trauma, and I just wanted to share my story. I was visiting family in Georgia, near Atlanta, but about 20 to 25 minutes away from the actual city. Luckily, my friend was visiting them with me. My parents were hosting a neighborhood get-together and were making mixed drinks, but ran out of liquor and some other various items, and asked us if we could swing by a few places to grab some things. Plan was simple. I would drive, the first stop would be the liquor store, the second stop the grocery store. We'd make it as fast a trip as possible so we could help get things ready and enjoy the limited time we had to spend there. My friend used to work in a liquor store and has extensive knowledge of the types of liquor, mixers, etc. So I was confident that she would be able to find what we were looking for and even come up with some extra ideas. Even though the plan was to be fast, I knew we were going to spend more time there than necessary in the liquor store because she loves browsing the selection of stores that are out of town. So we grab what was on the list and continue to walk the aisles while she picks up and examines some bottles and gets excited when she sees something that's rare or unavailable where we live. This goes on for a little while, and a guy that we assumed worked there approaches us and says, "Do you need help finding anything or have any questions?" We definitely did not need help, not with my friend the expert. So I said, "No, but thanks so much. We already found what we needed and are just browsing. Thanks for offering your time, though." Yeah, I'm too nice. After I politely declined, he hung around and started to make small talk. It was okay at first. Sometimes it's nice when people chat with you, considering we tend to have our faces in our phones. Well, he starts by commenting on the weather and what a beautiful day it was, saying that the rest of the holiday weekend should be nice too. Then he says, "Oh, where do you live?" That took me aback. I was already feeling uncomfortable with how close he'd been standing to us, and was just getting weird vibes. Not to mention annoyed at this point because I wanted to talk with my friend and move on with the rest of our to-do list. So maybe he just wanted an idea of what part of town we were from, maybe trying to just make more small talk. But the way he phrased it, the way the tone of his voice changed, the way he almost demanded it rather than asked. Maybe he wanted to let us know about an event going on somewhere. Maybe something benign and kind, like to inform us there had been a traffic incident and if we were headed in that direction to take an alternate route. Like I said, I'm too nice and often naive, so these were the things going through my head trying to justify that my uneasiness was unwarranted. But leading with, "Where do you live?" instead of "Do you stay on this side of town?" or "Are you headed north because there is insert event or traffic warning?" would have been a little less creepy in my opinion. I was doing most of the talking because my friend was so preoccupied with the different bottles, pulling them off the shelves, looking at the prices, wondering what she could mix them with, etc. So, me being me, I tell him we don't live around here and are only visiting, which triggers a whole new array of questions. Like, oh, where are you from? Who are you visiting? Where do they live? I was as vague as possible. I lied about where we were from exactly. I did say we were visiting my parents. I said I didn't know my way around here, and couldn't even begin to tell him where they lived, and that I was relying solely on GPS. I don't know in hindsight if that was a good idea or not, but that's what happened. He keeps pressing. At this point, my friend, who isn't as nice and doesn't try to be polite as I do, chimes in. I can't believe I used to worry about being so polite and nice, even to a creepy liquor store employee who wouldn't leave us alone, despite other customers entering the store. I even thought to myself, why wasn't he asking them if they needed help? Anyway, she interrupts me and the creepy guy's conversation after hearing that and says, yeah, we need to go to that aisle over there and grab Mixer and then leave. I didn't realize how much time we've been spending here and we're running late. She then hands me the bottle of liquor that she had picked, making sure that mine and her wedding rings were clearly flashed by now, in case he didn't already notice them. We make our way over to the aisle, and he follows. He asks things like what we were mixing, what event it was for, and tries to recommend something else. When he tried to recommend something else, my friend says, yeah, I used to work at a liquor store too, and I found that I like this combo, but maybe I'll try it next time. Thanks though, enjoy yours. He keeps talking and we keep moving toward the checkout. We're standing in line and he says, I have a fun, great group of people going on the lake this weekend on my speedboat. You guys should come. We will all be partying all weekend. Really? I literally just told you that we are visiting my parents from out of town. So why in the world would we want to spend that precious time ditching my parents to spend with strangers on the lake? Especially if he had noticed our wedding bands. No thanks. Like I said, we have plans with my parents this weekend. He starts babbling about how there's more than one day in a weekend and how we should get out on the boat, even just for a little while. And it would be a great time. My friend is finally like, hey, we said no thank you. We had our things rung up by the cashier and got our receipt and started grabbing our bags. While we're walking away, I hear him ask the cashier, do y'all sell ice? The cashier says, yes, we do. Just pay here and grab it at the cooler on the way out. Is that all you need? Creepy guy says, yep, thanks. Throws some cash on the table and says he doesn't need change. What? We thought he worked there. After all, he was offering to help us find the right liquor, and when my friend said that she also used to work at a liquor store, he didn't correct her. This whole time, we thought we were just being followed around by a creepy employee making small talk. Now we realize we were being followed around by a creepy guy that was free to easily follow us out of the store. Now, I'm thinking a million miles a minute. No one knew his name, just in case something more serious became of this, because he didn't buy any alcohol. He didn't get carded, and he didn't pay with a card. Who goes to a liquor store to buy ice when you're not even sure if they sell it? Well, at that point, he's right on our tail, following us out where he'd be passing the ice cooler. My friend and I had both picked up on how he obviously didn't work there. I think it's fair to say that anyone would question in the back of their head why a guy would spend a decent amount of time in a liquor store talking to two girls, not browsing or even purchasing any liquor for himself, just to follow them to the checkout and ask if they sell ice. So we're speed walking toward the car. Luckily, it's the kind of car that I could start before even getting in. So I had the car running, and as soon as we got close enough, the car sensed the fob and unlocked for us. I locked the doors as soon as we were both in safe. The car is a Ford Explorer, and it's got extremely tinted windows. You can hardly see into the car even if you press your face against the window. We wonder if he saw us get into the car, and if so, would he follow us? We watched him walk out struggling with the bag of ice and look around. The parking lot only had a couple other cars in it. He stayed outside of the store and set the ice down and casually plays on his phone. I originally was planning to wait until he got into his own vehicle and drove away before pulling out, but decided we'd wasted enough time and he wasn't even walking to his car. Maybe someone was picking him up or something, but we didn't have any more precious time to waste on this complete random creep. I was probably overreacting anyways, and we could be spending time with family and friends instead of idling in a parking lot. Plus, he wasn't in a car, so even if he did have his own car in the lot and was waiting for us to leave, it would take him a minute to get into his own and follow us. And if someone was picking him up, well, then he'd still be waiting for them. Now that my thoughts have gone that far, I decide I'm completely overreacting and pull out. We knew he couldn't see who was in the car, we didn't know if he ever saw us get in, and he didn't approach us while we were idling either. And guess what? We needed ice. We didn't think the liquor store would sell ice, we never asked or saw it. We sure as hell weren't going back in there to buy it, once we did find out. We had to go to the grocery store anyways, so I pulled into the grocery store parking lot a few miles down the road. My friend says to just drop her off so she can get in and get out and we can finally hurry up and get back. We only needed a couple of other things besides ice that were small and easy to grab. She gets out and I start circling the parking lot waiting for her to come out. I feel like it's taking forever and I call her. Her phone rings in the car, in the passenger seat. Great. So I keep circling, and after what seemed like forever, she came out with the stuff we needed and the ice. She hops in the car with the stuff, not even bothering to open the back door or trunk to put the ice back. So she just has this giant bag of ice on her lap and says, "Let's go now." She said the guy was in the store. She didn't notice until he was behind her in line, and he said, "Hey, what a coincidence. Where's your friend?" To which she said, "Yeah, pretty weird coincidence," but she didn't tell him where I was. If she told him I was outside in the car, she was basically telling him that she was alone in the store. He could easily plan to follow her out to wherever I was parked and try something along the way. This place was packed. If I wasn't circling, I'd have been parked near the back of the lot for sure, and most likely between other cars, which would have been beneficial for him if he decided to try something when she was getting into the car. I think that not answering his question was pretty smart. She did have an attitude about the coincidence, but if anything, I think that showed him that she wasn't naive and that she wasn't afraid to call him out. She didn't have her phone with her either, so it's not like she could call or text me. But even then, suppose she did have her phone on her. Who's to say he wouldn't have knocked it out of her hand once she was close enough to our, hypothetically, parked car? She said he was holding a pack of gum, and that was it. He went to the same extremely crowded grocery store that we just happened to go to buy a pack of gum. She said he tried to give her his business card after she checked out, while he was paying for the gum he apparently came there to buy. She told him that he said, "I'm just gonna be blunt, you and your friend are very attractive ladies, and I'm hoping you'll give me a call. Your friend is especially attractive, and I was hoping the liquor store wouldn't be the last place I saw her. Don't get me wrong, you're very attractive too, but the liquor store isn't the last time I'm supposed to see you both. It's just not supposed to be that way." He's extending his business card, and she didn't say anything. She walked out and tried to blend in with the crowd, and luckily, I happened to drive past the front of the store for the millionth time right when she needed me. We were both grateful that the rest of our visit went great, and there was no sign that the guy had followed us home or anything. How he got to the same grocery store we were at so fast, I honestly don't know. Maybe he was alone, or maybe a buddy was nearby and he was messaging him and got picked up right when we pulled away from the liquor store. I don't know. What I do know is that I'm happy that my friend was with me, and I will no longer be the over-polite, naive woman who doesn't want to hurt anybody's feelings. If things get weird or I get a hint of uneasiness, I'm trusting my gut, and I don't care if I hurt anybody's feelings. And I'm also making sure I don't leave my phone in the car. This could have been a coincidence, but it also may not have been. This was my freshman year of college. The campus was uptown and the frats and party houses were downtown. My suite mate and I liked to party, and we're always downtown together. Girls usually travel downtown in groups because, well, it's really dangerous and super ghetto. Although it was always just us two because it was easier to be ourselves and truly have fun. We knew how to take care of each other in situations where the other is blacked out, etc. One night, we had just left a frat party, and we were positive they put Molly in the juice. This was common, but the brothers would usually tell one of us before they do. so my sweet mate and I get completely messed up after 3 or 4 cups of it and decided to walk to the next house. It was around 3 a.m. and we were walking the streets. My sweet mate had no jacket, wearing a crop top. It was the middle of January in upstate New York. So we decided to stop by one of the frat houses we were passing by so that a brother could lend her a hoodie. We stumbled in, she grabbed a jacket, and I grabbed a hammer for some reason. When I'm messed up, I tend to be a total kleptomaniac and steal random objects like staplers and just random stuff. I don't know why, but yes, this is important for later. So we're walking down the main street of downtown, hammer in my coat sleeve, and this guy runs up to us from the other side of the street. He looks like he's maybe in his late 20s. "Hey, can you help me? I'm bleeding from my hand. My house is right there. Please, just help me." He had blood on his fingers, and he was holding his hand. And I didn't think anything of it, and I was truly concerned to help this guy. I know now that it was super sketchy and I should have just walked away, but my sweet mate and I walked into this dude's house. We followed him in, and that's when I started to feel in my gut that something was wrong. He just stood there and stared at us. Didn't even go clean up or anything. My sweet mate looked at me and whispered, "There's no furniture in here. This is sketchy." Then he told us to wait right where we were, and this was weird because weren't you just asking for help? I looked at him, and without thinking held the hammer up and started losing it. "Who the hell are you? Who else is in here? What are you trying to do? I'll mess you up." Just completely losing it on him. My voice is pretty loud, and I'm a strong-built female. He was like, "Please, put the hammer down. Why does she have a hammer?" He put his hands up, and you could see that he had no wound on his hand. He kept going, "Just put the hammer down." Then we heard someone else walking from the back of the house to where we were. I grabbed my sweet mate, and we booked it out the door and down the street. We walked into the deli where all the college students chill out or wait for their rides back to campus. We sat down and we looked at each other, and we both just started laughing. It was a messed up situation we got ourselves into, but who knows what would have happened if I didn't have that stupid hammer. The story is very short and a bit anticlimactic, but I wanted to share the story anyway. When I was in 5th grade in my science class, from what I remember, there was a project we had to do that used the sun. So we went outside to what was the reading garden next to the building. It wasn't actually owned by the school, but was owned by the library and also next to the building. However, they allowed people from the school to do whatever school stuff they could, like in this case, do a science experiment. So we got there with our group, and we started in on our experiment. After maybe 10 minutes, some guy walks to one of the benches with what I believe was a bag of seeds, but I couldn't really tell. This guy on the bench that he sat at was probably at least 8 feet away. I looked down at my project for a while, and then eventually looked back up, and I saw this guy pointing at me weirdly by moving his finger up and down. Or so I thought. While looking at the guy, I pointed to myself and mouthed, "Me?" thinking he was pointing at me. Then, I realized he wasn't pointing at me, and instead was pretending to shoot a gun at me with his fingers made like a finger gun. After a while, my group member Maria noticed and told our teacher. Our teacher noticed too and said that she would watch the man. We went back to our experiment, and after a while we could hear other kids who probably noticed go up to her and tell her about the man. He was still doing the pretend shooting thing, so after a while my teacher had had enough and told the man that he needed to leave. I don't remember what he said, but he got mad and tried defending himself by pretty much saying he hadn't done anything wrong. He eventually left, and my teacher called the work off, and we went back into the school where she reported the incident to the office. We went back up to the classroom to talk about what just happened, like what was in that bag. When talking about what just happened, my group member Nathaniel said he could hear the man quietly say how he could get past security very easily if he could. Or something along those lines. To this day, I wonder if what he said was serious or not. So this is my first post here, It's long, but a scary experience from 15 years ago. I'm 29 and female, and anyways, I'm not from the US. I'm from a smaller country. And when I was 14, I had a missed call off of a number that I didn't recognize one day. Being 14, I never called, I only text people, so I asked this number who it was, etc. The reply I got was that they had called the wrong number by mistake. No big deal, except they started to try to text me things like, "How are you?" etc. I was naive and played along when I was bored. I made up a fake name and even sent him a fake photo of some random girl off the internet just because he bugged me so much. And I didn't want him to know me because stranger danger and all that, but I did tell them that I was 14. He never called me again, and I had no intention on calling him, so we just texted here and there. He told me he was 17. He was very intense in terms of telling me how I was too nice for him and that he was so lucky. I was never the mushy type, and it always seemed like a cheesy film scene when he went on like this. But he was very persistent. I could get up to 100 messages a day, and I might reply to maybe 20 of them. I saw no reason to be worried until one day I told my friend about this guy I was texting, and we decided to prank call him. And this guy answered who sounded like he was at least my dad's age. We freaked out, and I stopped texting him. He figured out it was me who called him because of my sudden ghosting. He put two and two together. To this day, I don't know how. It's not like today, where tracking is somewhat easier, especially since I gave this guy a fake name and my phone number wasn't attached to any of my social media back then. I told him the part of the country I lived in, but not what town or any other details. He kept calling me, and of course I ignored him. Then, one day in school, me and the friend that prank called him got several messages. When she prank called him, we forgot to put her number on private, and missed calls asking us where we were, did we like him, and telling her to tell me to come meet him, and it was pretty intense. She was obviously freaked out as much as I was. Then even more so when he sent us both a picture of our school. We completely freaked out. There's 6 schools in our town, and how he got the right one, I will never know. We stayed after school to study in fear that he was outside. My maths teacher was a family friend, and I waited for her to come around to ask for a ride home for us. We went to my house, turned on our phones to a crazy amount of messages, all saying he would meet me one day and how much he loved me. He told us that he had traveled 4 hours and couldn't understand why we didn't come out to say hi. I was petrified to tell my mother, so we decided to ditch our phone numbers and get new phone numbers, and just never utter a word of this ever again. For the next few weeks, I lived in a world of constant fear and anxiety. I couldn't walk alone even though I knew it was probably impossible to know who I really was. But in the end, I told my mother and went to the police because I knew this guy had bad intentions. The phone number I had for him was a burner phone, basically. It had no details attached to it and was impossible to really look into any further. Nonetheless, we did make a statement, and that was that. So yeah, the man pretending to be a 17-year-old boy who drove 4 hours to meet a 14-year-old girl, let's never, ever, ever meet. For the backstory, my fiancé is 24, and I'm 21, and we recently got an adorable 2-year-old German Shepherd back at the end of February. She's been a great addition to our family, and she loves her mama so much. I've had many dogs in my childhood, but I've never had one as loyal or smart as my current German Shepherd. Now, this encounter happened a few weeks ago, but my mind still goes back to it every once in a while, so I thought I would share it here. My fiancé and I live together in an apartment complex, which is nice as it offers some nice amenities for our new pup, like a dog park and a large space of grass right outside our apartment. We usually take our pup to this space of grass to let her run around and do her business whenever she needs. This one day though, my fiancé and I decided to take her out together and get some fresh air. It was a hot 90 degrees plus, so I was only wearing a sports bra and shorts, trying to combat the overwhelming heat. I'm walking her and taking her up and down the hill until she gets done doing whatever she needs to do, when I notice her turn to where there are some cars parked. She's the type of dog who loves other dogs but doesn't care one bit about humans, so I assumed maybe there was another dog around. Instead of turning back to finish her business, she keeps her eyes on the cars, purposely positioning herself between me and the cars. A few seconds later, I watch as a man exits around the cars, me not noticing him before because of some foliage. During all this, my fiancé is a little out of it, so he doesn't notice any of this, but as the man walks around the cars and down the road around the grass, my pup is tracking him with her eyes and keeping the separation between the man and I. Eventually, the man stops and pulls out his phone, pointing it at the sky to take a photo. My fiancé, still being the goof that he is, stares up at the sky too, commenting about how beautiful it looks. But because my pup is staring at the guy, I'm staring at him too. I just have a feeling that there is something wrong with him. My pup doesn't care about other humans. They could walk by any time and she would not even give them a second glance, but with him it was different. When he finished taking the photo of the sky, I watched as he turned his phone toward me and my dog to take a photo of us. Now, I know I was scantily clad because it was hot and all I was doing was taking my dog out, nothing else. I had locked eyes with this man as he turned his phone and I could tell that it freaked him out a bit, seeing that I had caught him trying to snap a photo. He hurried away after getting caught, my pup and I watching as he walked down the road. Now, I haven't seen him since this incident, and I'm not sure if he lives in the complex or if he was just walking through, but I am happy that my German Shepherd was looking out for me. She got plenty of treats when we got back inside for that. I was inspired to post this, probably my third odd experience, after reading a post here that reminded me of it. It happened probably when I was about 5, I want to say. It was before my family moved states and we lived in a 2-story house in New England. I'd say our house was at least 100 years old. That doesn't exactly explain the phenomenon I witnessed, but maybe it had been a site of another house at one time, I'm not sure. A little backstory, I was a pretty sensitive kid, and very in tune, especially around this age. My mom told me she'd often be thinking of something like, I want to make chicken for dinner, and then I'd ask her if we could have chicken for dinner. That sort of funny thing. It seems dumb and silly, but I also think it's a bit telling. Our laundry units were in the basement of this house. My mom never liked going down there much because it was wet and pretty dark. It also smelled like earth. One day she was carrying me down with her to put a load of laundry in the machine. I asked her, and I remember this pretty clearly, who those people in the corner were. She freaked out and asked what I was talking about. I remember I saw 2 people there, sort of see-through and sort of floating above the ground in the upper corner. One was an adult woman, one was a young boy. They both had buckles on their shoes, I told my mother. Note that I was too young to know about pilgrims or old-fashioned clothing at this age. I didn't learn history in school yet at all. They were wearing odd clothes, too. I told my mom. The mom looked angry, but the boy says it's okay. And I remember that. The apparition of the woman did look very unhappy, and it scared me, but her son spoke to me and told me that it was okay. Anyway, after relaying all this to my mom, she freaked out and we went upstairs fast. I'm not sure what it was. Like I said, I wasn't learning about history at this young age. I didn't watch much TV either because I went to an alternative school. I was also kind of put off by old things and scared of them. We lived in a very historically rich town and neighborhood for the War of Independence. My wife has an obsession with collecting old things, like vases, clocks, paintings, and basically anything that looks like it's from the Victorian era. In my opinion, it feels more like simplistic hoarding, but I also want to keep her happy, so I don't really ever bother her about what she buys. Most of the time, it's innocent stuff that looks like replicas, but there have been a few times where she's had some decent scores at estate sales. The only score I ever had was one that I was initially proud of. Unfortunately, it came when my uncle passed away. He was an older man. My mom and he were 15 years apart in age, so she was 55 when he passed away at 70, back in 2018. It's not super important, but I felt the need to explain why my uncle would have died naturally when I was only 30 years old. When he died, my mom called me and I went over to his house to spend some time with my cousins. My wife didn't come because she had to work, which was fine. I told her it was just going to be a small get-together, and then it wasn't worth taking the day off for. My mom and I got there, had a nice dinner in his honor. At the end of dinner, when we were all just sitting around and talking, my oldest cousin told me that I could take whatever I wanted from this house. They were intending to sell most of it before they just got rid of the house in the end. As soon as she told me this, I knew exactly what I wanted. My uncle's old grandfather clock. It was a nice wooden clock that he loved dearly, and I thought it would be a neat item to both have in his memory and score some points with the wife, since it was something she totally would have bought. We loaded it into my truck, got it covered, and got it home. I had the neighbor help me get it in, and he kept remarking how nice it was the whole time, so I was convinced that I had done a good thing by taking it. When the wife got home, I took her into the dining room and showed her the clock. Her reaction was the exact opposite of what I wanted. She looked at me and told me that we couldn't keep it. I was heartbroken at first, so I asked her why we would have to get rid of it. She looked me dead in the eyes and said that it had a bad energy about it, and that she didn't feel like my uncle wanted us to have it. I flatly told her that my uncle was dead, and that I didn't mean to disrespect him at all, but he had no need for it, and my cousin said I could take it. She was insistent that we needed to give it back. It was a small argument, really, but in the end, I basically told her that it was mine now, and that we were going to keep it. So now, with all of that out of the way, let's talk about why I should have listened to her in the first place and just given it back. The first event that occurred happened on the first night we had it. We were sitting in the living room and eating. I know what's the purpose of a dining room if you're going to eat in the living room. When the lights in the dining room randomly kicked on. Initially, I didn't think much of it. I thought maybe I'd left them on, despite being fairly certain that I hadn't. I turned them off and went to leave the room. As I walked out, they immediately kicked back on. I was a bit shocked at first, but kind of just let it go. So I turned them off and just went back to the living room. What seemed like as soon as I sat down, there was a loud popping noise that came from the dining room. I got up again to check and found that the bulb in the light fixture had completely blown, like the glass shattered inside the housing level of blown. This was the first event, and probably should have meant more to me than it did. But I moved on, and hindsight is 20/20. The next event happened randomly around a week or so later. We were in bed, and out of nowhere, that damned thing started chiming super loud. It rang 7 times, and then stopped. I jumped up and went down into the room with the clock, and the pendulum wasn't even swinging. I was seriously confused at this point, as the chimes shouldn't have gone off without having wound the clock, but here it was, middle of the night, and it was definitely going off. The third event was the last one, for reasons that will become obvious here soon. So after the whole chiming in the middle of the night, I decided to ask my wife what she meant when she said it had a bad energy. She told me that something about the clock was just dark, and that it was telling her we weren't meant to have it. I told her that I would think about either giving it back to my cousin or donating it to Goodwill. That night we decided to go out and eat and just have a good night together. When we were driving out to the restaurant, my cousin called me and just wanted to check in on us. We were talking, and my wife asked her about the clock, kind of just blindsiding her with an "I think the clock is haunted, did your dad ever tell you anything about it?" Much to my surprise, my cousin then told me that the clock actually originally belonged to my great uncle, my uncle's father. and that my uncle took it when he passed away because he was strangely drawn to it. Apparently, my great-uncle was an aggressive drunk that was actually physically abusive to his son, her father. She said that when he died, my uncle basically gave everything of his away and then threw away what he couldn't sell. But for some reason, he just would not let go of the clock. She told us that my uncle never really liked the clock much, which was a complete 180 from what I was thinking, and that she had always thought there was something creepy about it for some reason. So at this point, I'm realizing that I'm in possession of a clock that was most likely haunted by my great-uncle's very angry spirit, and I right then and there made the decision to get rid of it. We ate, had a decent night. When we got home, I entered and saw what looked like a pile of glass in the living room. I stepped in and flicked the light on, only to see that the clock had been knocked down and to the side. The glass in the front door was completely shattered, and the face of the clock itself was destroyed, and the door that blocked the pendulums was basically off its hinges. This clock was heavy as hell, but yet it had somehow managed to tip over and completely destroy itself. Well, I say that, but I think we can all assume what probably actually happened. So I cleaned up the glass and took the whole thing apart, removing each and every screw, until the overall clock was just wood and some metal scrap. The next day, I took the wood of the clock out back, and I burned it. I gave the metal to my neighbor who does a bunch of metal recycling and art sculpting and whatnot, and I never looked back. I may have honestly loved that clock and thought it was really neat, but it wasn't worth being haunted by an angry dead relative. I'm fairly new to posting on Reddit, and came across this subreddit and thought a little history on the farm I live on would interest most people here. So please bear with me as I find you will relate to why I'm so freaked out, and not too crazy about the fact that I will be inheriting this piece of land. First off, let me take you back to the early 1900s, when an outbreak of typhoid fever struck a family that lived on the land we now own. They were a mother and a father to a young baby. Also living on this land was an old farmer. This so-called man had found out about the family's sickness and had locked them in a wooden corn crate due to how contagious and detrimental typhoid fever was. He left them to succumb to death by starvation. I can't even fathom the torture this was for them. Their bodies were then buried about a quarter of a mile from my house, right under an apple tree. There are still 3 large stones placed underneath it. Now we can get to the mysterious lady in a white nightdress that still roams the land. Her first sighting had been in around the 1930s. My great-grandmother lived down the road from where I now live. She had lived there before cement roads replaced dirt ones, and outhouses were the only means of a restroom. She had family staying with her for the week, and then one morning one of the family members had looked out the window and watched as a young woman in a white nightgown slowly walked up her yard and went into the nearby shed. This was strange because no one had lived within walking distance, and why would they be going into the shed? They had then decided to go see what this mysterious woman was up to. As they entered, there was no sign of anyone. It was as if she walked in and just disappeared within the minute it took them to get inside. Now this is where it gets better. The most recent sighting of her was in the late 1990s. My uncle had been hunting around the same area of this unfortunate family's burial site. As he was trekking through the woods, a woman in white approached him, asking him for a dance. He had laughed and said, "I'm sorry, but I've really got to go," because he was so taken aback by this wandering woman just gallivanting through our woods. As he walked away from her, he turned back and she was gone into thin air once again. I personally have never encountered anything with this woman, but it is rumored that it's the deceased mother. But I also have had my fair share of experiences separate from this subject. I could keep you here all day reading some of the stories I have about things that have happened on this land. If you took the time to read this, then thank you. I hope you enjoyed and would like to hear some of your personal stories as well. OP did have a comment that I would like to add to this. The most crazy thing I myself ever experienced was one night I was outside feeding our animals. I looked into the woods, and there were old oil lamp lanterns, just the glow of their flame, floating out past our fencing in the field. There were probably 10 at least. Let me tell you, I dropped my flashlight and booked it out of there faster than I ever thought I could run. Another instance was when my grandmother was hanging clothes out on her line before I existed. She heard an old classical song coming from the edge of the woods, also by this same fence line. She explained that it had ran down almost as if it were on a track, and the sound dissipated as if a train was going by. Something she could never really explain. This was in the middle of the woods. How in the world would classical music be playing, especially in thin air, in the 1970s? One night, I was on my way home from a particularly hard day at work. I spaced out as I drive a familiar route. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed that there was a shadow. At first, I didn't think much of it. However, the shadow never seemed to vanish. So I looked over to the passenger side of my SUV, and this shadow appeared to be running along the fence beside my car. The more I acknowledged it, the more prominent it became. I had an overwhelming sense of dread, like this thing was after me, and if I didn't get away, I was in some real trouble. So I hit the gas, trying to outrun it, but it kept pace with my SUV. However, just as I was sure that I wasn't going to get away, a tractor-trailer drove past and its headlights hit the shadow person, and it vanished like it couldn't survive in the light. I was on the phone with my friend, and I truly believe that I encountered a shadow person that night. I drove home as fast as I could, feeling that hell itself was right behind me. The next one is a little more intense, and all take place on the same day. Me and my older sister went to Gettysburg, PA, and made a day of walking the battlefield. As the sun went down, we went to do a ghost tour. It started off in the basement of an old bed and breakfast that has many different spirits. When we entered the basement, a table sat in front of the room, with a variety of toys on it. As the tour guide told us the history of the old B&B and the events that had transpired during the Civil War. My sister screamed that something had pulled her hair. The tour guide laughed and said that it's just the little boy that died here. He likes teachers and caregivers. My sister nervously laughed and said, well, lucky me. As the guide finished the story and we were exiting, they stopped me and my sister and asked my sister to check her pockets. In her jacket pocket, there was a red toy car that I clocked as we entered the basement at the beginning of the night that sat on the table. Now, it was in my sister's pocket. But that's not the creepiest thing that happened to us on that night. Now, the first half of the story, the spirits focused on my sister. This time it was my turn, and unfortunately the spirit I encountered was no child. As our guide walked us across the battlefield, we stood at the edge of some woods. There was a sign that said, "Do not enter." I asked why we could not walk down the path. Our guide told us there is a Confederate soldier that haunted this path, and if you encroach on its territory, the spirit gets upset. However, that was an understatement. I asked if I could walk the path, and the guide said you can, but it's a bad idea. Me, being brash and in my late teens, said, well, ghosts can't hurt me, and what do I care if I upset him? The second I crossed into the soldier's territory, I had a bad feeling like every fiber of my being was telling me to get the hell out of there. But I ignored it and pushed on. As I got further, I heard my guide yell, "Do not cross the fallen tree." Yeah, right, I thought, as I continued. About 100 yards in, I came across the tree. I put my foot on it to step over it, and as if on cue, my body froze, refusing to go any further. The wind stopped, and all sounds of nature stopped. I heard a sound of a horse walking, and then its neigh. Looking around, I saw no horse. It stopped in front of me, I would say around 25 to 30 feet away. I heard a loud packing sound, and then a click. Next thing you know, I saw a flash of light and a loud bang, feeling something whiz by my face. I turned around and ran out of the woods, noping the hell out of there as fast as my legs could carry me. Getting out of the woods, I felt safe asking the guide what the hell actually just happened. She said that's how the soldier says hi, by shooting at intruders. So my next set of stories takes place at my house. So many strange things have happened there. I will start with the little things first and work my way up to the creepier stuff. Well, inside of my house dwells the spirit of a little old lady, and she's been here ever since I was a child. While she's not an angry spirit, sometimes she does get a little rowdy. For example, at night when it's just me in the house, I can hear her standing outside of my door and talking. If I ask her to go away, she will leave me in peace. As a child, I actually slept in the room where she passed away, and I slept in it all of my childhood. While I didn't have any spooky things happen there, I felt that in its own right bore mentioning. This may be why the spirit is more active around me. My mom had always been a skeptic, and still was all the way up to her last days. But one day, our personal Casper, the old lady, wanted to make herself known. So while me, my sister, and mom sat talking in my little sister's room, the bathtub turned on full blast, the toilet flushed, and then the sink turned on. Another event that was more annoying than scary, to me at least, I was sitting downstairs watching TV, the remote being on the other side of the room. The next thing I know, the TV channel starts to change. It stops on the news, and I ask the spirit of the old lady to please stop and put back on my show. The TV goes back to the channel I was watching. Out of reflex, I say thank you, and I hear a whisper that says, "You're welcome." Now, these last two stories take place outside of my house. The first being after I got home from a hard day at work. I looked over and saw two full-bodied apparitions. I could not make out the exact attire they were wearing, but I can tell you that they were old-school military uniforms. I looked away after I noticed them, and when I looked back, they were not there anymore. The last one honestly freaked me out. It's short, but still creepy. I walked out to my car to get something, and at this point I can't remember what anymore. But as I walked up to the passenger side of my car, I grabbed my item and shut the door. When I stood up, I hear an apparition right behind me growl, "Dustin." I took off like a bat out of hell. When I looked back, I saw a dark shadow standing by my car, and it vanished as soon as I caught a glimpse of it. And a bonus story. I recently had a nightmare where a woman stood on all fours at the foot of my bed. I grabbed the nearest sharp object, which for some reason was a pencil, and I stabbed her in the head. She didn't bleed, which to me was the scariest thing, because I work under the "if it bleeds, it can be killed" philosophy. I woke up, and I was unable to move. And until I was able to move again, I could feel the overwhelming presence just out of sight. I was so scared that I used my sheer force of will to break the paralysis. Once I was able to move again, I no longer felt the presence or the malice of this creature. I'm currently 14 years old, and these encounters all started around 12 months ago. If you know how to deal with this, please do help. My first experience, my family and I, mom, stepdad, younger sister, went to a haunted prison. As the tour began, we walked through corridors and old buildings. I kept on getting an eerie feeling, so I shined my light towards the end of the corridor. I quickly saw a tall, shadowy man run across the corridor. A few scary seconds later, I saw a tall, white, shadowy man do the exact same thing. I didn't tell anyone, as no one would believe me. Second, I was in my bathroom brushing my hair, as a bunch, 30 to 50, small orange balls, I assume orbs, floated around me. I didn't freak out, I just kind of looked at them and felt calm. And this was about a month after the prison experience. Third, very frightening, my sister and I were visiting my dad for Christmas. We booked a hotel. It was a golf hotel and it had vineyards. Anyway, my younger sister wanted to go find rabbits at around 11 p.m. So we grabbed torches and went toward the vineyards. In the middle of the vineyards, there was a fountain with paths all around it. I stupidly said, looks like a ritual has been done here. At that moment, I got a really bad feeling, like the one at the prison. I shined my torch at a random path, and a girl, maybe 500 meters away, was just sitting there. Her hair was black and her dress was dark. I shrugged it off at first, and we kept walking around. I got the feeling about a minute later, and I turned around and she was chasing us. She had a white face, and it was terrifying. I grabbed my sister and I pushed her in front of me as we ran away. This was the most frightening thing ever, but no one believed us. Fourth, and this happened about an hour ago, I was showering and about 10 to 20 small white orbs appeared. I shrugged it off as I'm okay with them and they seemed friendly. I've had other experiences. For example, I've said I like this song and the speakers instantly turned up without anyone touching them. Or the time when the power went out and a shadow person appeared in front of me. I don't really know if all this is paranormal or if I'm just weird. I would like to get to know whatever is out there, as long as it's nice and friendly. I, 23 female, live in an apartment complex that, like many other apartment complexes, has more residents than it does parking spaces. The spots next to the building usually fill up before 9 p.m., so when I come home late, as I often do, I usually have to park across the lot and walk. My complex is in a very quiet suburb, literally down the street from a police station, so I've never thought twice about the walk. Last night, I pulled into my parking lot around midnight, and unsurprisingly, all the spots next to the building were full. Not far away, though. There are a handful of spots in the middle of the lot between some garages and our mailroom. A car was pulling into one space on the side closest to my building. I noticed that there was still another space on the other side, one spot over from the entryway to the mailroom. So I loop around and park. The other car was turned off, but the driver hadn't got out of the car yet, so I took my time turning my car off, checking my phone for a moment, etc. I'm naturally a nervous person, and I wanted this person to get out of their car and be on their way before I had to walk in front of it to make my way to the building. So after a second, this guy gets out of his car and walks behind it, towards my car, but also towards the 3 buildings behind me, so I think nothing of it. Until he stops, and it looks like he's looking directly at me. I'm not even sure if he could really see me in the dark, but I swear I felt like I was making eye contact with him. Then, the guy starts walking again, speed walking, directly at my car. There's a little lane in the middle of the parking spots to allow cars through, but he's not walking along it. He's beelining directly for my driver's side door. My heart started racing, but I assured myself that it was nothing and he was going to change his path any moment to head towards the mailroom, or one of the buildings behind me. I kept waiting for that trajectory change, but it never came. He walked straight up to my car, and I was in complete panic. All I could think to do was to make sure my doors were locked, and thank God they were. I swear on everything, I saw him reach for the handle of my rear door, but then just before he touched my car, he suddenly veered just slightly to the sidewalk around the back of my car and into the mailroom. I didn't even think. I just jumped out and bolted across the parking lot. A quick glance over my shoulder showed me that he had come straight back out of the mailroom when he heard my car door. I heard him walking quickly, but I didn't see which way he was going because I was too focused on getting myself into the building. It all happened in less than a minute, but it had me worked up for the rest of the night. I kept telling myself I was overreacting, but there was no reason for him to have come at my car the way he did. It just wouldn't make any logical sense. I know if the guy lives in my complex, it's more than likely I might encounter him again, but I'd really be happy to just never see him again. So this was nearly 20 years ago. Sheesh, I feel old. Over a few months, all these posters of missing women kept going up in the neighborhood I lived in and the neighborhoods nearby. One night we were sitting in a bar, and there were probably about 20 people in there total. Everyone having a nice time, no drama, nothing out of the ordinary. When this guy walks in and sits down, he was wearing regular, not noteworthy clothing. He didn't talk or say anything strange. He wasn't even acting in a weird way, but the whole room went cold. People stopped talking, shuffling around in their seats. It was like this dark, unrecognizable energy had entered the room. I remember feeling breathless and like I just wanted to run out of the room. Everyone else in the bar seemed to be responding the same way. The guy walked over to the bar and asked for a drink, and I've never seen this happen before to a sober customer who hasn't caused any trouble, but the barman turned him away. And the guy left. Almost immediately, the atmosphere went back to what it had been. I walked up to the bar and ordered a drink and asked the bartender why he refused that guy a drink. We were friendly, as I drank there regularly, and he said the guy just made him uncomfortable in a way he'd never experienced before, that he couldn't bring himself to serve him a drink. Other people in the bar began to agree, but no one could put their finger on why. A couple of weeks later, I was watching the news and there was a breaking story about how someone had found dismembered limbs in a rubbish bag. The remains belonged to the missing women whose missing photos we had been seeing for months. They were all sex workers. They showed a photograph of the serial killer they'd caught, and sure enough, it was the guy in the bar that night who no one could bear to be in the room with. I can't explain why, because when he walked in and asked for a drink, he really didn't do anything strange. But he brought this terrifying, inhumane, unrecognizable energy with him. Sometimes I can even wonder if he had just killed someone that night or killed someone an hour or so later, and that's why the presence of evil felt so visceral that night. When I was younger, about 9 or so years old, me and my best friend, both small and quite thin girls, mind you, were walking home from school. It was already dark outside since we go to a school which works in double shifts. Some go in the morning and others on the afternoon shift. It sounds weird, but that's how it goes here. We were already on the street that has our houses, and we're quite close to them. Mine was closer to where we were, and hers was about 10 to 12 houses down. We see this guy walking on the opposite side of the road. We see him and think nothing of it. It's just some guy walking somewhere. But then the guy speeds up and crosses to our side. That's when my friend gets scared. And this guy looks rough. He was tall and had some baggy clothing on as well as a hoodie, and the streetlights weren't the best, so we couldn't see his face. He was walking faster and not going back to his side of the road, and my friend kept saying we should run, but since I was being quite dumb and didn't think anything was wrong, I refused. And that's when my friend said run and grabbed me, basically dragging me to our neighbor's yard, since their yard gate was open and we hid behind it. The guy kept walking and constantly turned around to look at where we were. He saw where we ran, but I guess he didn't follow us since there were lights coming on from the neighbor's window. When he was about 3 houses down, we just started running each in the direction of our houses. She ran on the opposite side of him, but I had to run parallel to him because my house was on a dirt road, which was separated from the paved one by a big ditch. I vividly remember seeing him stop to turn around and see which houses we ran to, and since I was closer, he definitely saw where I went. And this creeps me out to this day. When I think that if my friend wasn't there that night and if she hadn't dragged me to that yard, I would have almost definitely been abducted, or worse. One time, my parents had left for work, my sister had gone to school, and I, 20 female, was alone at home. My neighborhood is in a fairly secluded area, situated at the top of a huge hill, so it's fairly rare to have anyone visit. I was lounging around and watching TV when I heard the doorbell ring. I never answer the door as, again, we never have anyone visiting, and my family obviously knows how to get in the house themselves. So I ignored it, even when it rang a second time. By the third time, I was a little annoyed and I tiptoed over to the front door. The front entrance of our house is essentially a big wooden door surrounded by a wall, so there isn't any way for us to check who's on the outside, unless we go to our piano room and check out the window. This means there's no way for anyone on the outside to know if we're there unless we're stomping around in the house. So I stood behind the front door waiting for the person to leave. I mean, no one answered your third doorbell ring, right? Surely you would just leave. Suddenly, there was a heavy banging on the door, which made me jump. I heard a deep man's voice speak from the other side of the door. "I know you're in there." My heart jumped and got caught in my throat, and for a second I'm looking around, trying to figure out how the man knew. After a long silence, I heard muffled chatter and then the sound of footsteps leaving. I didn't dare to open the door in case they hadn't actually left. After I called my parents to check if anyone was meant to be visiting, no, not that we know of, I was a little surprised by the odd encounter, but eventually I went back to watching TV and soon forgot about it. 2 hours later, I hear the doorbell ring again. Feeling a sense of nervousness, I turned down the TV volume. This time I got up slowly and snuck over to the piano room where I could possibly sneak a peek and see who was there. I knelt down and slowly raised my head over the sill to see, at the door, was a woman dressed in all black. Black high heels, a plain black dress which came down to mid-calf, and an unusually large brimmed black hat, which was bizarre considering it was summer and very hot. She had long dark brown hair, though her face was covered by the brim of her hat. The only thing I could see were her bright red lips pulled up in an eerily wide smile. Beside her was a tall, buff guy wearing a dark suit. I don't remember much of his features except that he was a Caucasian man and had a very serious expression. What disturbed me most wasn't so much the intimidating guy, but the sight of the woman who stood there literally unmoving, smiling at the front door, which was yet to be opened. It felt like a solid minute before she finally took a step back and without a word, began to walk down the driveway. The man followed her step. To this day, I'm not sure who she was, why they were at the door, and whether they were the ones which knocked at the door earlier. But needless to say, the deep voice calling, "I know you're in there," and the image of the woman in black was not one I forgot easily. So I've posted before about the sketchy places I used to live at, and I thought that although it may not be as scary or personal as my other stories, I would share this one anyway. So as I've said in my previous posts, my family isn't particularly rich, so we always end up living in dodgy areas simply because the housing is cheaper. To give a bit more of an explanation, it's quite common to see up to 4 cop cars in the streets. It's kind of a guessing game of which dealer they came for this time. In fact, my previous landlord turned out to be one and was arrested, causing us to have no choice but to move out. It wasn't a massive move, as we literally got an identical house on the opposite side of the street, so I wasn't going to miss out on all the drama. By this I mean I watched a car being stolen from my window. I'd like to add that I was 13 at this point, and I couldn't really give more of a statement to the police than what the camera on one of the other houses had caught, so I just watched. Another time a new friend was coming around mine, and there was a fight in the streets. I told her to just walk past it, but she spent the entire evening being paranoid that they will come after us for whatever reason. The instance that I think sums the place up perfectly is when I was talking to a different friend, and I said I didn't know what weed smelled like, and without skipping a beat, she responded with, "It smells like your street." Anyway, fast forward to when I was 16 or 17, which is when the story I would like to share takes place. So at this point in my life, I was experimenting with a number of hard drugs. Nothing serious, just at parties and such, and I'm not into that stuff anymore. Just rebellious teen stuff at the time. I would also like to add that these drugs didn't come from any of the people on my street. So it was about 7 or 8 in the evening, and I was cycling to the center of town for one of these parties. I had barely left my house, and I was about a corner away, when I saw a man lying on the pavement with 2 paramedics from a nearby ambulance car crouched next to him. I just kind of cycled past thinking, wow, what a legend, as I myself have been in situations where I drank so much and passed out. So I arrive at the party, get pretty high on whatever Class A drug I was doing that day. We have a great time, and I'm back on my bike in the early hours of the morning to go home. But as I'm about to reach the street from before, I see the blue and white police tape and officers standing around a white tent on the pavement. I quickly turned, as not only was I underage, but I was completely off my face and didn't want to get into any trouble. I tried to get around the place, taking the next street, and then the next, and then the next, but I soon had to realize there was no way I could get back into my house without crossing the police tape. I went up to one of the officers and told them that I lived there and needed to get through. I tried my best to hide my dinner plate-sized pupils. He was super nice and escorted me to the corner of my street. As I was reading the news the next day, I found the article on the man that I had cycled past. It turns out that he was stabbed to death on the street after having some kind of drug-related conflict. The scary part is, and the thing that I feel extremely guilty about, is the fact that I just cycled past chuckling and thinking he drank too much, when in reality, the man was dead. I'd never seen a dead body before that, and it didn't fully sink in until days later. He didn't look dead, and I assumed the paramedics were just blocking my view of the pool of blood around him. But still, knowing that you could be laying lifeless in the street, and people will go straight past you assuming everything is fine is scary to think about. I know there wasn't anything I could have done, as the paramedics were already on the scene, but this is the kind of thing you read about in the news, not see in real life. To this day, I can't forget how he was just lying there motionless. Me and a bunch more people in the area left flowers and cards on the lamppost next to where he died, and although I never knew the man, thinking of it still hits me hard in the feels. It just makes me think, what if I had left 10 minutes before I did? Would I have had to have called the ambulance? Would I have even stopped? I don't know the answers to these questions. All I know is that if I ever see someone in need of help in the future, I will not think twice about stopping. And I will not just laugh it off like I did with that man. So to conclude, I hope that guy can rest in peace and his family have found justice. Thank you for listening. So I'm in northern Florida, and if you're experienced to the area, you know that's full of trees and woodland. It also gets super dark where I'm staying, as there aren't any city lights. Not saying this has anything to do with my story, just providing possible context. I've been in this area for 3 to 4 months with nothing supernatural happening to me. One night, in my apartment, I'm sleeping, my room is near pitch black, and I suddenly wake up. I'm sitting up for some reason, and across my bed at my feet is this sort of shadow man. This man is such a dark black that he isn't transparent like a ghost or anything. He is also so dark that it is almost brightening up the rest of my room, if that makes any sense. I want to be scared and turn away, or jump and turn on my lights, but my dad has always taught me not to be afraid of anything paranormal because, if it is evil, you being fearful will never turn out good. So I just stare back at it, not moving and staying calm. Now my feet are maybe half a foot away from this thing at the most, so if it wanted to do anything, it could have. I'd say realistically the Shadow Man was 6 feet generally large, but it did not have any facial features, none at all. It also didn't have any clothes or body parts from what I can remember, just the outline of a person. We stare at each other for about 10 seconds, and then suddenly it turns, diagonally, and goes across me to the right and disappears about 3 feet later. It doesn't have any feet and the legs are gone at the mid-shins. It totally just floated across my floor. What the craziest thing was to me was that this turn was so unconventional. Its legs rotated first and then upper body, and then it floated across. When it moved, he never looked at me again. It was stuck to really specific movements. So when his head wasn't facing me, he couldn't turn and look at me when he turned diagonal to me. The best way I can explain his movements is like a train stuck on a train track. He couldn't move freely and seemed to be confined. The rotation, too, of his body before he left was confined and unnatural. I'm sorry if this explanation is poor, but I'm doing my best. After floating across for 3 feet, he just disappeared. And it's been about 4 months since this happened, and nothing else has happened since. What might be interesting to you all is that before I had this, I had a heart problem, and it was getting worse every week. My heart would flutter, and I would get more and more shortness of breath, and my heart would clench up like I was almost having a heart attack. Note that I am in good athletic shape, and I take vitamins every day and have an above-average diet. My legs started falling asleep, too. I would get dizzy when I leaned over, and I could no longer run for even close to the distance that I used to be able to. All signs of somewhat early heart failure. However, after this Shadow Man encounter, all of my symptoms got better and literally disappeared. Take this how you want. I'm not saying this Shadow Man helped me or not. I'm just leaving it open as an option, that maybe this shadow creature helped me somehow. I'm all ears to whatever you guys think the Shadow Man was, and will do my best to answer any questions. Also, I'm not religious, nor am I non-religious or anything, and I don't believe in or practice anything crazy, just open to everything, kind of. I looked online for a while and tried to find similar stories of people encountering or seeing what I saw, but nothing was really similar. When I was 13, I was on an ATV with my 2 older sisters, one 15 and the other 18. We were going to my grandma's, which was less than 2 kilometers away from my parents' place. We were traveling through our fields, but on the way I suggested we go around the fences so we didn't have to open the gates. It was pretty much the same path, just a bit off to the side. We had gates because this was our pasture for the cows. As we get to the middle of the field, we all notice something sitting on top of the hill we were about to climb. On top of this hill, we had a somewhat big pile of rocks from working the fields a long time ago. We slowed to a crawl because it looked human. We thought maybe a calf fell and was stuck, or maybe it was my uncle who looked after the cattle. But this thing was sitting weird. Basically like how Spider-Man perches over buildings, crouched down on top of a rock. As we were sitting there trying to figure out what we were seeing, this thing slowly stood up and my heart sank. Its arms were long, grossly long. I screamed to stop and instantly jumped from the front of the ATV to the driver's seat, replacing my sister. As we were switching, this thing started running toward us, but it was running weird. Its arms were swaying back and forth like a normal runner, but because of how long the arms were, it just looked weird. You would think it would run on the long arms, but it didn't. It was running fast. I turned around and shot off straight through the field. My sisters were screaming and it was still coming at us, but I honestly could not look back at this thing. I just told her not to look at it. We rounded the corner, and that was the last we saw of it. After that corner, it's the trail to my parents' house. As we got home, I crashed the ATV into the deck, trying to get in as fast as we could. We were so scared, my parents actually believed us. They called all the family to warn if it was a trespasser. They said nobody saw anything or anyone in the field. Now, I want to describe this thing. It was tall, skinny, and it wore no clothes. It just had a body, is what you could see. Grayish color, and the head wasn't shaped like human. It was thin and small. We were about 30 to 40 meters away from this thing, and it was during the day, too. This all happened in Alberta. I could describe it a lot better if anybody has any questions. These are my encounters with the creatures known as dogmen while living in Kentucky. They still haunt me to this day, and I thought I would share them all with you. Story 1. I was 8 years old, living in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. It was the summer of 2012, and it was a hot one. One summer night, I woke at 11:30 to midnight, and I was sweating like hell. So I walked over to the window to crack it. And that's when I saw something in the tree line by our stock pond. We owned no animals other than a small terrier, but the previous owners were commercial farmers. I watched for about 5 minutes before it emerged, and when it did, I was horrified. It was a wolf-like creature, about 6 to 7 feet tall, and partially covered in dark gray hair that shone in the light of the full moon. It walked out on 2 legs, and then very quickly dropped on all 4s and ran the 100 or so yards to the stock pond in mere seconds. It drank for a while, and then stood up on 2 legs again, and I got a really good look at it. The thing was horrible looking. The fur was all patchy, it was very skinny, and it looked like it was covered in some kind of injuries. Years later, when I saw the 3rd Harry Potter movie for the first time, I saw the werewolf, and that's almost exactly what it looked like. It then took off across the old cornfield and into the woods on the other side. I had heard stories of the creature, but never really believed them until that night. I heard a week later, while out around town with my folks, that there had been an attack on a nearby farm, and 3 hogs and 1 horse had been eaten and ripped to shreds. This was my first, but not last, encounter with the dog man. Story 2. I caught glimpses of the things consistently ever since that first sighting, but never got another good look at one of them until fall of 2015, a month before we moved to Maine. It was dusk, and I was going outside with some of my friends playing with our Nerf guns, as young boys do. Those were the good days. Anyways, after a while, we got bored and we started a fire. We told dirty jokes and laughed for a while, but then we started hearing noises in the woods, and the laughter died down. We all retreated to the woodshed and armed ourselves with axes, pitchforks, and the like before returning to the fire. About 10 minutes later, something rustled in the woods about 20 yards behind us, but no one dared to look to see what the hell it was. Finally, my friend Jeremy turned around to look, and the scream he let out could have brought down the barn roof. That's when we all turned around and saw one of them, except this one was much taller. I'd say 8.5 to 9 feet, and it was pure muscle and gray hair. It was on all 4s, sniffing around the barn, but when Jeremy screamed, the thing looked at us, stood up on 2 legs, and snarled. That's when my dad came out of the house with his shotgun and screamed, "What in God's name is going on?" We all just pointed and screamed, and then he looked at it, yelled, "Go on, get!" and shot at it twice. It ran into the woods yelping, as I think it had been hit, and we all went inside and locked the doors. My dad sat in his chair with the shotgun the whole night, and I swore I could hear scratching along the side of our house until daylight. Turns out, when we went outside the next morning, there were claw marks all over the side of the house. After that, everything was quiet until we moved, and I've never seen anything like that since. My first paranormal experience was when I was about 7 or 8. My brother and I decided to walk to our friend's house, which was about 100 yards down the back alley. I will give a little history of the town area I grew up in. It's a small country town called Pine Grove in Pennsylvania. It's the typical small town where everyone knows everyone. We would play outside every day, especially in the summer, and our best friends lived right down the street. There is a main street that goes through the entire town, which we lived off of, but there was an alley that went right past the back of our house. My and my brother's friend lived down the alley, about a football field away. But back to the story. My brother and I started getting closer to our friend's house, and we see this man by the stop sign at the end of the alley. The stop sign is past our friend's house, about 150 yards away, He looks like what I would picture God looking like. White man with silky white pants and shirt. As we get closer, my heart starts pounding faster and I realize that he's floating and not walking. My brother saw it too and said, "Hey, he's floating." And we started running. The man thing looked right at us at this point and he was about 100 yards away from us. He literally had no face, just blank, blurred skin, no eyes, nose, no nothing. We had reached our friend's house and they were asking why we looked so scared. We told them what happened, and the boys rode their bikes around the neighborhood but saw nothing that fit our description. I still, to this day, have no idea what the heck it was, but it still makes my heart race as I am typing this. Any ideas on what it could be? I wrote to a paranormal podcast host and he said it could have been an alien. I've seen a few UFOs in that town, so it could possibly be true. I'm also wondering if anyone else has seen anything close to this. I only have 3 short encounters with them. Possibly them, I don't know. I live in Phoenix, Arizona, so it's one of the biggest cryptids here. My first experience with one of them was when I was 12. I was in the living room laying on the floor as a child often does, and to put into perspective, the living room on one wall was just the sliding door to go outside. It was in that noon area where everything is a bit dark but the sky is still blue, and when I looked at those sliding doors from the left to the right, was a tall, lanky figure. It was dark and I don't remember seeing its face, but it was just walking there, hunched and looking down, walking from one side to the other, and I remember just getting this, aura of fear and anxiety. I just laid there, looking out, not knowing what to do. Since that experience, I've actually had severe anxiety attacks. My second encounter was when I was 15, and I had moved to another house. I never felt right in this house. It's too big and it's so easy to get dark in here. But I felt a little good with my cat and dog. This one night my dog was getting severely freaked out by something in the backyard. I thought it was just a dude being a dick since there was an alleyway between my house and my backdoor neighbor. So I went up to look and see what was freaking out the dog so much. And there, standing 3 feet higher than the fence was, again, this dark, lanky figure. That same aura got to me and I just remember running to my room and closing the door, not coming out until morning. That's the encounter that really made me scared of the dark, and I still live here in that house. The third and final encounter was when I went to Sedona for vacationing 1 year later. I remember hearing that Sedona was a major hotspot for aliens and paranormal, and now I can see why. We stayed there for 3 days, and for the first 2 days, I'll tell y'all, I was happy by just seeing strange lights in the sky and UFOs. It was pretty sweet. Then we decided to go hiking on one of them tours, and the aura fell on me with a couple of others. I never saw if it was them that caused it, or if it was what being scared of hiking was. I brushed it off me as being scared, but when I left up on the edge of the cliff, I don't know if that's what you call it, but there was a hole there where people would swim and just chillax, and it was surrounded by a hill of rock, and just above I saw a lanky, dark figure, but I'm sure that was part of my imagination. On the way home, though, I do remember seeing lights in the sky, and I remember that we got close to hitting something, and I don't know if it was because we were going fast, and it's a blur, but it looked like that lanky, dark figure again. Now this Sedona one is iffy because I don't know if it's what I saw exactly or just my imagination, but at least the lights were cool. When I was about 10 or so, and spending the summer with my grandparents in Poland, I used to go to our neighbor's house, who always had 2 or 3 litters of kittens in their backyard. Me Being a little kid, I used to spend hours there playing with them and would go every day, or even twice a day. There was a house directly across my neighbor's house in which a really old lady lived. It was obvious that she had some kind of mental illness, as she would talk to herself and sit alone all day on her porch, chain-smoking cigarettes. One day, when I was making my way to our neighbor's house, I saw she was standing up to our gate. When she saw me, she started making a conversation. Me, not trying to be rude, I walked over to the gate and joined in the conversation she was trying to have with me. A few minutes passed of her asking questions of where I'm from, I'm an American, and how life is in America. I answer politely and try to get on with my mission to pet those kittens. Just as I excuse myself, she invites me inside. My 10-year-old self, knowing to respect elders and not trying to be rude, agrees to go in and continue our innocent chat. When I walked up the stairs to her front door, I started to get this putrid stench of rotting meat. I kind of hesitated to walk in, but I did agree anyways. When I walked into her home, all I could see was piles and piles of clothes, dishes, and blankets. I could barely see from room to room as these piles were almost as high as the ceiling. We somehow make it to her kitchen, and we sit down. The view outside her window looking into her backyard was so green but overgrown and neglected. We start up our conversation again, and she begins with talking about her life story. What she was explaining to me about her life didn't really make sense, as she would forget what she would say every few seconds and have to repeat it. After about half an hour of her trying to explain everything, she finally brings up that her husband died during World War II and that she was a single mother for most of her life, until her son committed suicide by setting himself on fire. As a 10-year-old, this saddened me, but also scared me, and the thought of being burned alive still gives me the shivers to this day. What she did next gave me many sleepless nights as a child, and I cannot seem to forget about it. She stands up and quickly shuffles into the next room. She brings 2 medium-sized vases. She then tells me that this is her husband and her son. I was shocked and saddened, but also happy that she had their ashes to remember them by. The happiness quickly turned into pure terror as she lifted the lid off her son's ashes and dipped her fingers in the ash and then stuck her ash-dipped finger into her mouth and swallowed. I was terrified and quickly made up an excuse that I had to go and my grandparents were expecting me. As I literally left crying, all I could think of was, why would she do such a thing? Eating her son's remains? As soon as I got home, I collapsed into my grandmother's arms and sobbed. I told her what had happened, and she warned me to never go over there again. From that day on, my grandpa always walked me to our neighbor's house to play with the kittens. The lady who ate her son's ashes recently passed. She lived to be over 100, and according to our neighbor, who took care of her for the last days of her life, she'd been suffering from mental disorders for her entire life. In the end, I feel sorry for that old lady and hope her soul was resting peacefully. But as a kid, that was definitely one of the scariest moments I have ever experienced. So lately, I've been remembering a lot of things that happened when I was younger, and I want to get it out somehow. But due to these 2 stories being on the shorter side, this will be a sort of 2-in-1 post. However, if any of you are interested, I plan on making a longer post about a separate story sometime after this. Maybe some others too, if I can remember. Anyways, on to the stories. The first one took place when I was about 10 or 11, and my mother had gotten done with the long day of shopping at a few grocery stores, but we were tired as we didn't have a car at this time, so our trips revolved a lot around walking and taking the city bus route, but we managed. We just wanted to get home. We were in a better mood once we got to the bus station that would take us the way home, but there were a few people there. One of the guys stepped up to us and said, "Hi," and smiled in this really strange, creepy way. It was like he scrunched his nose up while he did it and tilted his head toward his shoulders like a dog does when they hear a strange noise, and he did this really weird body movement. We said hello back, and he started talking to us. Well, my mom. He said, "You don't deserve to be out in this cold. You should be somewhere safe and warm." And just sort of creepily moved in on us. He was kind of hitting on my mom with things like, "Let me protect you," and "I'm a lover, baby, not a fighter." Keep in mind, my mom was married, and in no way indicated she wanted anything to do with that man in that way. The creepy behavior kept on going until the bus pulled up and we got on. And noticed he did too. The whole ride he was dead-eyes staring at us. The bus stopped at our stop. The man wasn't ready for the halt, so he got jerked along with the bus, and something of his fell and rolled underneath his seat. He got off the seat to look for it, and me and my mom took the opportunity to grab our stuff and rushed out of the bus. As we looked back while the bus was driving away, he was staring at us through the window, furiously, with both his hands up against it, and the stare made my 10-year-old self nearly piss myself. But the bus pulled away, and we shook it off and just went home. We never saw this dude again. Now, as for the second story, it's not exactly mine, and it was more of a recurring chain of events. My mom would go to this Subway, which was in a bit of a small lot across from this Walmart. It was like a straight line of establishments. It went in the order of Little Caesars, Subway, some salon thing, Radio Shack, GameStop, what used to be a Payless shoe store. But anyway, my father loved Subway and always asked for her to go get it, so she would. And when she'd come back home, she would tell us some story about how one of the male workers there had said some weird things to her or flirted with her. We were all always kinda grossed out by this, but we passed it off, as it didn't really matter anyway. But it got progressively worse. He'd start saying things like, "Hi, babe," when she walked in. Even the other coworkers were taking notice and giving their creepy coworker weird looks, according to my mom. So one day, she wanted me and my little brother to come with, as an attempt to get him to stop and back off. By this time, I'm pretty sure I was 12. And when the creepy worker sees us, he starts getting upset and uncomfortable and says, "You never told me you had kids." "Why wouldn't you tell me that?" he said in a sad, somber voice. And he just kind of asked my mother what she would like, and continued making the sandwiches, while keeping an angry yet sad look on his face the whole time. He practically tossed the sandwiches at us, and for whatever reason, my mother never saw him again. But I guess in the end, her idea of bringing me and my brother worked. Still, for the life of me, I'll never understand people like that.
This happened when I was around 15. I live out in the country and close to a lake, so I would always ride down there on my bike with my cousin. Well, one day, I decided to walk down, but met up with my cousin who wanted to ride bikes, so I started walking back home. My cousin was riding her bike in front of me. As I was walking, an SUV pulled up beside me. It was an older man, maybe in his early 50s. He stopped and asked me if I needed a ride. I told him no, and I also told him that I did not live so far away. He drove down the road and turned around and started to stop by me again. At this point I'm scared, because my mother always told me not to talk to strangers. I'm thinking he came back because I talked to him, instead of just ignoring him. He once again asked me if I was sure I did not need a ride. I once again told him no, and that I was fine. He drove down the road again and turned around. I yelled to my cousin to turn around and get home as fast as she can. She does not question me, so she must have heard the panic in my voice. She and me start running home as fast as we can. I don't remember getting home. I only remember running inside to my mom crying. I told her what happened, and my brother immediately grabs a bat and runs down the driveway to find the man. My mom takes me to the police station to make a report. After I give a sketch artist my description, we heard nothing for a few weeks, until a girl in the next city told cops some guy tried to pick her up, and her description matched mine. They finally found the guy who said he was going on to offer us some drugs. After this, I never walked alone again.
I recently moved to a new part of town and have been enjoying the many walking trails nearby. I prefer walking in the evening when it cools off, and have been walking for close to 2 hours every night after sunset, but before midnight. Even though I'm a smaller woman, I've never been very afraid of doing things alone or being out past dark alone. I have a strong rebellious and stubborn streak, so I guess I've always enjoyed proving wrong all the voices that gasp in horror and go, "Oh, but it's not safe." Interestingly enough, the only time I've truly felt a bit creeped out in all the miles and hours I've walked over the last few weeks was the night that this happened. I'm normally pretty impulsive with routes and go where the spirits lead me, so I end up just wandering and playing with taking pictures of whatever catches my interest. I was walking along, and a man passed me on the path, going the opposite way. This was in the first half of my walk, and a spot that sort of acts as the hub depending which route I feel like taking for that night. So this guy passes me, and I feel sleazed out. You know the feeling, where they sort of eye rape you and openly leer. But he kept going one way and I kept going the other, and did my thing. But a good while later, I mean at least 30 minutes, if not an hour, when I looped back through that main hub area, there he was, sitting on a bench with his backpack and phone in hand. But it looked like he was maybe legitimately waiting, resting, or trying to rent a scooter, so I kept walking a bit and then stopped to take some pics of the natural scenery so I could naturally kind of see if he was still there. And he was sitting there and didn't seem to be fixating on me or following, so I kept going and somewhat shrugged it off. But something didn't feel right. I could sense I was being watched, but kept telling myself I had probably just had a bit too much weed before leaving the house. Still, I had been high the other nights too and never felt like this. So I kept going, but kept reaching up and pausing my earbuds and listening for any extra sets of footsteps, watching for any extra shadows, and I'm always aware of my surroundings. With CPTSD, how can you not be, am I right? And something was off tonight, even if I couldn't immediately define it. I had walked about a quarter mile from where I last saw the guy when it happened. I sensed someone rapidly moving up behind me. I paused my music and glanced back and immediately recognized him. All I could think was just thinking, what the actual hell? So here's what transpired. C is the creep, and M is me. C, running up. "Oh my god, are you okay?" M, yes? What are you talking about? Mentally thinking over my last moves, and yeah, I had been acting relatively normal for a human. C, well, I saw you walking around earlier, you know, and just... I have food. Do you need food? I want to make sure you're okay. Me, giving him the full-on, "Are you kidding me" stare. Dude, I don't know what your issue is, but I'm just out trying to enjoy the evening and get some exercise. C, oh, okay, so, do you have a phone number? M, deliberately looking down at my phone in hand and back at him with a curt, dry, no. C, okay, I just thought I could walk with you. Hey, am I bothering you? I'm just trying to keep you safe. Me, literally rolling my eyes. Well, it kinda looks like you decided to wait for me and then follow me, and I'm just not real keen on how that looks, you know. C, realizing I'm not playing his games and starts squirming. Well, but I just happened to notice you and wanted to look out for you. Hey, do you smoke weed? Me, dripping with attitude now. I mean, yeah, of course, but then gave him a look that said, but not with you. so don't even think about it. C. Okay, well, then can I walk with you? Let me walk with you. Me. I had been slowly continuing my walk, and now stopped and turned fully towards him. What the F? No, I sure as hell prefer you don't. Him. Wait, what did you say? Me. I said I sure as F prefer that you don't join me, because if you try to, we're gonna have a problem. I'm out here trying to enjoy my walk, alone, how I set out. I was enjoying it, so tell me which way you're going, please, because we are not walking together. C, dramatically feigning shock to my response. Okay, fine, I'm not actually going this way. I just did to check on you. Did he seriously admit to just stalking me? What an idiot. Me, with an exasperated sigh. Look, man, I've been trying to be nice, but I'm about to tell you to F off. Do you understand? And I have a tone almost nobody ever hears, but boy is it actually scary when I do use it. And because it's rarely used, it's all the more scathing and forceful when I do it. C, feigning further shock at my response. But you can't tell me to F off when I'm trying to be a gentleman. Me, face now full of an "are you kidding me?" Seriously? What the actual is wrong with you? C, crossing the street and turning around. Fine, but I was just trying to help you and keep you safe. Me, completely done and calling after him. I didn't need your help. I do just fine keeping myself safe, and furthermore, it is not being a quote-unquote gentleman when the lady not only doesn't need any help, but also did not want or ask for it. So just go F off now. I turned and walked away, glancing back a couple times to be sure he wasn't still following and was still walking away, but otherwise pushed my shoulders back and literally tossed my hair back too, after a block or so of angry muttering and curses thrown his way. I turned my music back on and went on like nothing happened. But that, you can't tell me to F off, I'm trying to be a gentleman. Oh, my sweet baby Jesus, bless this creepy little nice guy's stalker heart. I had to deliver boxes of food for my job. I was calling clients to ask if they wanted a box. I called a client's brother because he was the main contact. He told me yes, the client would like the food and that the client has been staying at his house for a while now, so I should deliver it there. He gave me the address, and I was on my way. The house was brown, modern looking, had long windows. The windows were long enough that I saw the full bodies of naked mannequin statues in the window from head to toe. The sight of these mannequins gave me the absolute creeps. I became super on edge and put my keys between my knuckles. I walked onto the porch, to the door, and rang the doorbell. I stepped back, a much further distance than what I normally would, because I had a bad feeling that something was about to happen. A man with a sunken-in face like a C shape opened the door. Heavy-set and unkempt, he wore baggy clothes and had an unshaven face, neckbeard and all. His appearance was unsettling. As soon as I saw his face, I knew my gut feeling was right. Trying to remain friendly, I said, "Hi, I have a box of food from insert company name here for insert client name here." And he said, "That's me." I repeated what I said, all the while trying to hand him the box. His arms did not leave his sides. They didn't even move an inch. He said, "Oh, you're from company name? Well, come inside, I have something to show you," in an extremely creepy way. He stepped outside across the porch to where I was standing. I said, "Well, here you go," and he stood there saying, "No, come inside." He wouldn't stop saying it, so I screamed, "No!" and put the box on the ground, ran to my car, and drove away as fast as I could. As I was driving away, I saw him standing on the porch closer to my car than he was before, like he was trying to follow me, but slowly. I reported him, and my boss called me to say, "I even wonder if that was the brother who lured you in from the phone call." I like to think this story belongs here, but if it doesn't, let me know, and I'll be happy to move it. It's not unusual for me to trek out on solo hiking day trips. For context, I'm a 31-year-old female. I frequently visit the nearby provincial parks, Canadian here, that are generally well used. It's rare I end up on a hike not seeing at least one or two people. I grew up going on camping and hiking trips, and feel very comfortable out in nature. I always inform people where I'm going and when I expect to be back. Safety first, right? One day, last year, I was going stir-crazy, so I took myself out to a popular nature educational center. A bunch of trails stemmed from this one spot, and they're not long trails, but are all interconnected, so it's easy to create your own distance. It was midweek, so I wasn't expecting to encounter many people, maybe a school group at most. So I grabbed my backpack, lock the car, and head out. It was a beautifully sunny day, mid-autumn, so it was a little chilly out. I was listening to the sounds of nature surrounding me. Some squirrels, birds, and even a deer crossed my trail at one point. I was sticking with the main trail, which had educational signs identifying the different types of plants as you went along. I've been trying to teach myself how to identify different trees on site, so this path was the best. I made my way up the first little hill, and made my way down the path where it makes a sharp right turn. Up ahead, I caught sight of a man wearing a dark blue jacket. Strange I hadn't seen any signs of the person or heard them, but whatever. Normally I'm comforted seeing someone else, but this time my gut instinct was not happy. I made a note of which way the person went, and continued along. Blue Jacket had taken the path I wanted to take to create a longer hike. It would have been a lot more secluded and less traveled, so for once I tried to be smart, listen to my gut, and just follow the main route back to my car. Keep it short and safe. I still had about 2 kilometers to get back to the parking lot. The clouds decided they wanted to skirt across the sky, making the woods a little dull and ominous. I kept looking over my shoulder, feeling very unsettled. The trees cast finger-like shadows that did not help calm my imagination at all. One of my favorite spots on this main trail had a few huge boulders and rock formation right smack in the middle that you had to go around. Really neat for photos and climbing on normal days, but today, they filled me with even more dread. I couldn't pinpoint why at first until I noticed some scuffs around the base of the rocks going the wrong way around. The trail is very obvious which way to go, left, and these marks were wrong. It was like someone walked around the rocks dragging their foot behind them. Animal, maybe? I couldn't figure it out. I wanted to turn around and go back the way I came, but that would have added 4 kilometers to getting back to the car. I stuck close to the far side of the real path and keeping a close eye on the rock formation. As I made it to the other side of the rocks, I caught sight of some blue fabric. The same blue jacket that I saw earlier. This person moved as if ducking down between some rocks to avoid being seen. For Blue Jacket Man to reach the rocks before me, he either cut his own path through the woods or sprinted through about 5 to 6 kilometers of trails. I didn't like the thought of either option, as I did not know this person and did not want to know them at this point. Maybe he was taking a leak. Yeah, I'll go with that. I picked up my pace and dug my phone out. I texted my usual hike friend telling them all the details in case I suddenly went missing. Yes, I attempted to do this while following the path. I only walked into one tree. I glanced behind me again while the rocks were still in sight, and I saw the man standing there looking at me. I ran the rest of the way back to my car, hopped in, and immediately locked the doors. Curiously, there wasn't a single other vehicle in the parking area or on the nearby road. This place was nowhere near any towns, so I have no clue where Mr. Blue Jacket came from. I took a couple of minutes to sort myself out in the car, and as I pulled out to leave, I looked at the trail ahead. There was that damn blue jacket on the signpost I had just passed to get in my car with no one visible nearby. I was so spooked by this encounter that I refused to hike there alone ever again. Maybe it was all an innocent misunderstanding, but it sure scared the hell out of me. So this happened last year in Virginia, and is also the reason I never backpack alone anymore. I was taking summer courses at the time, and we ended up with a 3-day weekend in June, so I thought it was a great time to go explore some of the Virginian wilderness. I did a Google search, found a state park with a trail that looked nice, and I let my roommate and family know the trail I was going to be on. When I got close to the park area, I saw a little outdoor shop where people hiking the Appalachian Trail stop. I went in to grab a map of the area just in case I got lost. As I was talking to the owner, he mentioned a trail that's not well known that has a pretty cool waterfall and a swimming hole. This piqued my interest, so I had him show me on the map. It took me outside the state park, but he said it was a great place to go. I paid for the map and thanked the owner. I texted my roommate and parents about the new trail, and I parked my car and set off on my adventure. I should note that the waterfall was going to be a side trip from my journey. I was planning 3 days and 2 nights. I started on part of the Appalachian Trail, and it was pretty packed with people, and some of them were really fun to talk to. As expected, as I got further and further from the main trails, I saw less and less people. Around early afternoon, 3 miles from my destination, I noticed it was unnaturally silent. No birds, no bugs, not even wind, and I had a feeling that I was being watched. I shook it off as me overanalyzing the situation. I got to the waterfall, and it wasn't too spectacular, but it was cool to look at. Plus, it had a good-sized area to swim in, so naturally I stripped down to my skivvies and took a dip. It was pretty refreshing. As I was getting my clothes back on, I started whistling to myself. It was Chill Bill because it was stuck in my head. That's when I heard something whistling the same tune back. I thought it was a bird copying me, so I went back and forth with it, and it would repeat whatever I whistled. I thought it was pretty neat. As I was setting up camp, I couldn't shake this feeling that I was being watched again, like I would get goosebumps and my hairs would stand up. As night fell, I built a small fire and lit my jet boil to make dinner. As I did this, I became hyper-aware that again there was no sound, just deafening silence. Some part of my brain was telling me that I'm not safe and I had to leave, but I ignored it and crawled into my tent with my flashlight and book. I went to sleep without incident. When I woke up the next morning, my site was trashed. My camp stool was nowhere to be found, my bear bag with my food was cut down and the contents were thrown across the site. My first thought was a crafty animal chewed through the rope and got at the bag, but I looked at the rope and it was cut with something very sharp. Plus, none of the food was even touched. I also noticed bear footprints all around my campsite. Keep in mind that I'm at least 6 to 8 miles away from the road. As I was looking at the mess, I heard a branch snap off in the distance. I turned to look in that direction, but I saw nothing. But I heard that whistling again, my whistle from yesterday. But it was different. It sounded more sinister. It made my hair stand on end, and this is when I listened to my instincts to get the hell out of there. It sounded like it was a little off in the distance, so I packed up my camp as fast as I could. The whistling got closer as I finished stuffing the tent into my bag. I didn't bother with putting anything away properly. The whistling was incessant and sounded like it was coming from all directions. I got fed up with the whistling, stood, and I yelled into the woods, "Shut up, and what the hell do you want?" It stopped whistling, and it was quiet for a moment, and then it repeated what I said in my voice. It sounded like me, but distorted, like it came from an old television. After I heard this, I immediately threw my pack on and ran the direction I came. I heard it moving just behind me, fast switching between the whistling and my voice. I felt like it was toying with me, not coming too close, but not being too far. Eventually, it sounded like it got further and further away from me, and then it stopped suddenly. When it stopped, I stopped, and I turned around, and I wished I didn't, because I heard the most bone-chilling screech ever coming from right next to me. That's when I started running again. I didn't look, I only ran. Less than half a mile, I ran into a couple that was also backpacking. They saw the look of terror on my face, and asked if that was me that screamed and asked if I was okay. I told them about what happened, and they decided not to go down from where I just came. We moved to a more populated trail as quickly as we could. As soon as I got back to my car, I drove to one of the park's ranger stations and reported what happened. Since the site was off park grounds, they told me it wasn't in their jurisdiction, but they would send a ranger to investigate. The ranger station's parking lot runs right up to the woods, and when I was getting into my Jeep, I heard the Chill Bill tune coming from the woods just in front of me. I never drove so fast in my life. When I told my roommates why I was back after only one night, all he said was, "Bro, I'm never going camping with you." A little bit of background about myself. I've worked my entire adult life in the Pacific Northwest woods. Over 15 years in total, with about 7 years of that being for the Park Service at Olympic National Park. Many experiences over the years could warrant the title of creepy. This one in particular has always stuck with me. While working for the Park Services, one of my jobs was that of a restoration carpenter. We would travel to old backcountry historical cabins, emergency shelters, homesteads, and chalets, tasked with repairing and restoring them to their original historic, accurate states. This was a wonderful and demanding job. I'd spend 8 days at a time living off the beaten path, usually deep in the backcountry. Sometimes we'd be flown in supplies, sometimes we'd use llamas or mules to pack our gear, all the while sleeping in thinly walled single tents, cooking over a fire or whisper-lit stove, using the same tools and techniques the original homesteaders had at their disposal in the late 1800s to construct and survive in this unforgiving environment. One late fall, I was assigned to work near Lake Ozette at an old homestead off the trail, near the constructed boardwalk. For those unfamiliar with the area, Lake Ozette is 8 miles long and 3 miles wide. It sits as the largest unaltered natural lake in Washington. Lake Ozette has a long and rich history of Native American culture. The Makah Tribal Center in Nia Bay houses discoveries found in the area dating back 2,000 years, along with a local village that was well preserved over 300 years ago by a mudslide that left most of the artifacts intact. The Ozette Loop Trail, which the homestead was directly adjacent to, is approximately 9.4 miles through and through. The man-made boardwalk takes you under giant cedar groves, meanders through huge patches of chest-high salal before delivering you to Alstrom's Prairie, about 2.5 miles from the trailhead. Alstrom's Prairie, a giant soggy meadow, was once farmed by 2 Swedish immigrants. They constructed a small cabin and some outbuildings in the 150-acre bog. With cattle, sheep, vegetable gardens, and the help of little Swedish ingenuity, they managed to etch out lives for themselves here for over 50 years. Over time, the forest, as it always does, decided to take back what was once its own. The now decades-long abandoned farm was hardly recognizable, and our job was to beat back the encroaching forest, put new windows in the main cabin, pipe in a new stove, apply fresh paint, and fix up portions of the semi-dilapidated barn. The ultimate goal being to allow guided tours to take place sometime in the future. For about 3 weeks, we stayed at the Ozette bunkhouse while working at Alstrom's. This was good duty for us. We weren't sleeping under the rain, our beds were warm, our hike was short, and the terrain, not difficult. We even had TVs. The bunkhouse was located near the highway and ranger station, and we would hike the 5-mile loop every day, bringing with us boards, tools, paint, and everything else we needed on our backs. These were full 10-plus hour days, usually started our morning hike around 7 a.m., and beginning our evening return hike back to the bunkhouse around 1700. At one point during the fall, there were 4 of us working this project, but at the time of this event there were only 2 of us remaining. Most of the hard work had already been finished. We needed to hike a few last boards into the prairie and complete a portion of the woodshed before we called the job done. I volunteered to be the pack mule for the day, my only job being to carry as many boards as I could muster in each trip to the prairie before returning to the ranger station for the next load. It was late in the season for hikers at this point. The weather had turned, and we'd be lucky to see 2 or 3 people a day doing the loop. After around my 4th or 5th trip, I was pretty wiped. It was getting late in the evening now, around 1600, and my coworkers had called it a day. I thought I could get one more trip in before it got too dark, my rationale being the more trips I did today, the less I would have to do tomorrow. We passed on the trail, I told him my intentions, and continued on. I delivered the last of the boards for the day, took a look around the prairie as the sun started to tuck behind the trees, and started my hour hike back to the ranger station. The lighting on the boardwalk was quite low at this point, the cedars blocking most of the ambient light left by the setting sun, and making visibility quite diminished. I'm not a nervous hiker, and I fail to spook easily. Having solo hiked for weeks on end in the backcountry, I've been stalked by cougars, confronted by Kodiak bears in Alaska, even ran into a few demented hillbillies over the years. As I left the prairie that evening, the hair on my neck stood on end. Goosebumps erupted from my forearm and an uneasy feeling swept over me. Suddenly, I wanted to walk faster, jog, and then sprint. I didn't. Instead, I convinced myself that I'd been reading too many fantasy novels before bedtime. I walked another 5 minutes or so before I started to hear something faint, something that sounded like music. Impossible, I told myself. I'm the only one out here and still at least 2 miles from civilization. That civilization in reality being likely the only other soul out there, my coworker. Sure enough, however, I heard music. More specifically, a piano. It started out so faint that I had to stop moving and actually try to hear it, the steps on the wooden boardwalk being too loud. Every time I paused to hear it, it became unmistakable and it got louder. I stood there, sun now fully hidden behind the horizon, in total silence other than this piano. I became aware that there were no longer the noises of life. No birds, no insects, no wind, no rustling of leaves or underbrush. Absolutely nothing other than this piano. It was as if everything was being weighted down by a fog of emptiness of some sort. I've encountered this dead time before in the woods. Certain places have it, but this was different somehow. Unique to this place and unique to this moment in time. I tried to focus on the keys, but I couldn't recognize the composition. Unsurprising, as I mostly listened to Metallica and Korn at the time. It was playing with a purpose. It was controlled, in tune, thoughtful. It was a song, and somehow I felt like it was meant just for me in this moment. I started walking again. Almost on cue, the music once again got louder. As my pace increased, so did the tempo of the keys, still in tune and never faltering. It reached a climax, the perfect combination of my haste, my dread, my heartbeat, and the tempo of the music. Then as quickly as it came, the piano stopped, whooshed away in the fraction of a moment. It didn't trail off, it didn't fade into extinction, it was just gone. Suddenly everything that was absent was swept away as if by a gust of wind. The stillness was gone, the gloom, the stagnation, and weight of everything was lifted. My next step on the boardwalk was once again in reality. The evening was just as absent of light as before, but it felt like life somehow had once again injected back into the forest. The woods seemed normal again. I didn't hear the piano again that night, nor since. I told my coworker every detail when I reached the bunkhouse, and he showed no signs of disbelief. We didn't talk about it again until years later, when something similar happened to another Park Service employee. When I told my grandfather about what happened, as he was a retired park ranger who had worked nearby at Mora, the next station over, without the least bit of hesitation, he asked, "Did you hear the bagpipes along with it, or just the piano this time?" It seems, as I've learned and experienced since then, there's a lot more to that place. A lot more to the Olympics in general than anyone really knows or is willing to admit. In college, I lived up on top of a mountain road, but still only 5 minutes to town down through a trail in the woods. There was a 100-plus-year-old oak in the yard, slab stone porch built by hand. I lived in a studio apartment that was outside of my main house. Main house was haunted, but my shack was cozy. The woods up there were weird too. I never really was in the main house at all, but the three who lived there said some nights you couldn't sleep for all the noise. floorboards creaking, thumps and knocks, etc. My experiences happened outside. Like I said, I hunted small game up there, as there must have been a rabbit colony in the vicinity, plus a few squirrel drays. Often out there while I was stalking, I would get the distinct feeling of being stalked myself. Keep in mind, this stand of forest is only several acres, but was preserved mainly because of the historic oak trees scattered around. It's old woods. I would hear laughter, like children's laughter, but not quite like in a creepy movie. It was a bit distorted and almost like a flirty giggle you might imagine a fairy would make. It would come from different directions each time I sought it. I eventually decided to stop following it and hunt, and it never did stop. I would sometimes spend an afternoon in town having drinks or hanging out at my friend's place. I'd finally leave and have enough liquid courage to hike back up the trail in the dark. That laughter would be replaced by noise. Just like things running all around you and dashing about the trees. I've been an outdoorsman for a long time, and I know the woods are noisy at night, particularly in the southern Appalachians, but this was different. It was dead silent out there. It was dead silent out there in that stand at night, except for this rushing to and from by some unseen feet. Not like some game fleeing, though. Deer run away and crash about doing it, but these steps were like something or things running swiftly around me. It's like it would cross the trail up ahead and then behind me, then alongside, but I could never see anything. I was a big-time night owl back then and was regularly up doing schoolwork into 3 or 4 in the morning. One such night, it had just snowed a fresh 20 inches or so, decent accumulation for the area. Our yard and the woods were like a paradise for me and my dog. I was excited to hunt around the next day for tracks and see if I could locate the rabbit den precisely. I was up working, and the dog came scratching to get in. Not frantic or anything. I let her in, and she lay down to sleep. Odd, because she's a husky and preferred the snow to my tiny heated apartment every time. I decided to call it a night too, and went out for a cigarette. It was 3:24 a.m., and I could still see it on top of my MacBook display before I closed it. I went out and noted the clouds were dispersed a bit, and the moon was bright on the snow. I lit my cigarette and was just looking out across the fence and into the woods when something caught my eye. It looked just like a silhouette of somebody leaning against one of those big oak trees. Like you would see somebody with the palm planted against a wall, with the arms straight out, leaning against it. It's not moving, so I can't tell if I'm just tired or the lighting is funny or what, so I walked further to the end of the porch, and as soon as I stepped on the fresh snow there, it took off. And that thing was tall. My estimates based on the tree put the thing at 7 foot. It ran along the border of the fence and back off into the woods. It was hairless as far as I could tell, and completely naked. Otherwise though, its form was just that of a skinny, tall man. I went inside and switched to boots, grabbed my rifle and my flashlight, and I went to check the tracks. I picked up a set of what had to be size 14 or 15 bare feet tracks. It ran along the fence and down the treeless stretch of a backyard, as if heading into the woods, but then the track just ended, about 20 feet short of the wood line. I don't know if it jumped to the tree line, probably could have, but there weren't any more tracks that I could find that night or the next day. It was like it just vanished. Never really could explain that one. So to give a little backstory, this happened when I was 7 or 8. It was the mid-2000s, and I was in Poland spending the summer with my grandparents, as I usually did every year. It wasn't until a year or so ago that I finally realized how scary and dangerous this encounter really was. I was at a store that happened to be on the corner of one of the main streets in the town, and I was waiting outside for my grandma to finish up her food shopping for the week. A few minutes passed, and a bald man in a red car drives up to the curb and rolls down his window. He asks me what I'm doing and how old I am. Me, knowing the rules about stranger danger and whatnot, I stay silent. Instead of taking a hint that I'm not interested in having a conversation with him, he keeps pestering me about where I'm from and what I'm doing alone next to the store. The next thing he said gives me the shivers every time I think about it. He said, "I can drive you anywhere you like. I have kittens in the car." But it didn't end there. He kept pressuring me to get into his car, and I finally said, "No, I'm waiting for my grandma to get out of the store." Right as I said that, she thankfully came out of the store with groceries in her hands and ran up to the car to ask what was going on. The man started turning red and stuttering, saying he was just concerned about me and was worried why I was outside a store by myself. When the man said this, my grandma turned white as a ghost and tugged me closer to her. Then she muttered some profanities to the man and pulled me away while quickly walking away from the car. Now that I think about it these days, it's really disturbing to know that if I had said yes to get into his car, something much more sinister would have happened. So to the bald guy in the car who wanted to kidnap me for who knows what, let's not meet again. This happened to me and my girlfriend on October of 2017. The leaves were changing color and the weather was starting to get colder by the day. It was raining pretty hard, and we were driving in the dark on our way back to a haunted attraction to celebrate the upcoming holiday. In all honesty, we just wanted an excuse to get scared and leave the house. While I was driving, I glanced at the rearview mirror and noticed an old red Chevy pickup truck was behind us, following incredibly close. When I got to a multi-lane road, I expected him to pass me as I assumed he wanted to go faster than the current speed limit. Well, I was wrong. He stayed behind me. It was a little unnerving, but I brushed it off. We got to the wooded road that led to the haunt, and I noticed that he was still behind us. Again, I brushed it off and figured that he must have just been going to the haunted house as well. It's a very popular haunted house in my area. We pull in and we can see the attraction. We saw a huge barn-looking building and a glowing violet and blue sign that read, "My Morbid Mind." We had been there every year since it opened, and every year was better than the last. The security guard tells us where to park. Once in our spot, me and my girlfriend put on our coats and head to the entrance in the pouring fall rain. We bought our tickets, and we were shocked to see that this year, because of the new It movie coming out, the theme was 3D clowns. Now, my girlfriend hates clowns. She's been terrified of them as long as I can remember. She's been terrified of them as long as she can remember. We're standing in line, and she pulls out her phone to take a picture of us to post to our friends and family on Facebook. Right as she does, this clown comes up behind us and photobombs our picture. She was so startled that when she noticed he was there, she impulsively slapped him. He stood there for a good 15 seconds just staring at her, looking into her eyes. Creepily, he just tilts his head and walks away. Throughout the haunted house, my girlfriend felt uneasy. Of course she was afraid, but she had an unsettling feeling. She kept telling me how she felt bad and thought she should apologize to him. We got to the end of the haunt and my girlfriend got chased by clowns with chainsaws until she got to the parking lot. Now the parking lot was bordered by fence posts, so people couldn't disturb the grass that surrounded the gravel area that was the parking lot. I caught up to her, and I could feel her heart drop from her chest when she saw the clown from before sitting on the fence post staring at her alongside another clown. They said nothing, they just stared at us. I looked in their direction and asked, "Can I help you?" And they said nothing. I said, "Hey, can you knock it off now? You're really scaring my girlfriend." He looked in my direction and laughed, a maniacal laugh, almost like the laugh you would hear from the Joker. We walked past, and they got up and all started moving towards us, following us so much so that we could hear their footsteps behind us. We speed walked our way to the car and we saw that the mysterious Chevy truck parked across from our vehicle. The Chevy truck was parked in a way that whoever was inside could see where we went. My girlfriend had had enough, and we got in the car to leave. Just as we left, I looked in the rearview mirror. They were standing there in the middle of the trail that leads to the main road, the two of them, just staring behind us. It was almost like they wanted us to know that they were watching us. To my horror, I realized he had a big butcher knife in his hand, and it didn't look like a prop at all. If it was, then I would be genuinely surprised. Its metal exterior glistened when another car's headlights hit the blade and the clown submerged into the corn. 3 years later, we are still getting strange phone calls from an unidentified number. Sometimes it's laughter like we heard that night, and sometimes it's a man's raspy voice saying, "I see you." I will say this though, I have never seen that red pickup truck again. I just want to start off by saying that this story may be a bit fuzzy because it happened a few years ago. If I'm going to guess, it happened when I was 12 or 13. So on this particular day, my brother, mom, and I had a dentist appointment. My mother and brother were scheduled before my appointment, so that meant I had to wait out in the waiting room alone. So I was waiting. I was on my phone playing games and browsing the internet. I don't know how long after I was waiting. Sorry, it's been a while, and I have forgotten some of the details. If I had discovered Reddit back then, I definitely would have posted this. Anyway, after a little bit of waiting, an older man who was probably in his 50s or 60s comes in. He looked like a stereotypical pedophile, and that freaked me out, I'm not going to lie, but I tried not to be judgmental. He then asked me questions. I can't remember many of the questions he asked. Again, sorry, but one question that struck me as odd was, "Where do you go to school?" Now at the time, this might sound stupid, but I told him out of fear he would get angry and possibly hurt me. So fast forward a few minutes later, at least what I think to be, and he tells me I looked puzzled. I was just scared and on edge because this guy who fits my description of a pedo is asking me where I go to school. Now, I know this guy could just be bored in the waiting room and just wanted to make small talk, but why to me, a 12 or 13-year-old at the time? I didn't tell my mom or brother because I was afraid I would scare them. So, yeah, that's my story. Definitely not the scariest one on this sub, but I wanted to share it because whenever anyone asks me of a scary experience that happened, I always think of this. I live in southern Oregon, a beautiful place in the west filled with some of the most beautiful forests one will ever see. The national forest I live against, I know like the back of my hand. I know stories from long ago about places in the middle of nowhere that have strange names, and that often draws me to these places to explore and feel nostalgic. These forests also have things about them that are off. Locals talk about how people disappear all the time in these woods. Sometimes over drugs, sometimes over foul play, and other times people just go for a hunt or hike and are never seen again. Just disappear without a trace. I have spent years in the deep wilderness hiking almost every day. The incident I'm about to tell you changed how I felt about the forest. My roommate and I left our home in the outskirts of the forest for a hike to a place that's basically a swamp flat. A small area of marshy swamp in a bowl-like canyon high up in the mountains. There's one road in and one road out. As we climbed the mountain, the rain had started to pick up. It had been mostly drizzle that day, but living in the Pacific Northwest, you get used to that, and it doesn't stop you from adventure. We finally get to the flats, and it's time to explore. We walk the trail into the flats, and as we admire the old growth trees surrounding the marsh, the wind starts to pick up. There was a nasty storm coming in. The trees started to rock back and forth and make a horrible snapping sound. And there isn't many safe places in the forest like this to take shelter from falling trees or branches, so we decided it was time to hike out. We hiked back to the car and were relieved to get in it and out of the storm. The car was parked in a small turnout on the side of the road. We sat there for a few moments in the car, taking off our jackets and turning the heat on and such. And that's when this truck pulled up. In the middle of a bad storm, in the complete middle of nowhere, a really old beat-up pickup truck drives up and parks in front of our car. Not completely blocking the car, but coming damn near close. A burly man steps out of the driver's seat and turns to look at us. I have to say, this is the only time in my entire life that I have thought to myself, something here is not right. The look on this guy's face gave me that instinctual feeling of fight or flight. As we watch him walk around his truck, I tell my roommate, just go, start the car and leave now. As he starts the car and begins to pull off, the man was reaching behind the seat of this truck and pulls out a long rifle. That's when my roommate hits the gas and flies out of there. As we pull away, the man pulls the gun out and points it in our direction and looks me right in the eyes. The feeling I got was you are going to die today, and I will never forget the look on his face. We got home and told our neighbors about the incident, and then proceeded about our day. When we got into the car the next morning to drive to town, the starter failed on the car. I often think to myself, had it failed up there or had that bad storm not come in and shoot us away, things could very well have gone south that day. This is going to be a somewhat long story, but the context is important into understanding why it's creepy. This was over 5 years ago, when I was still living with my parents. I've always been a night owl, and used to enjoy going for drives at night on the desolate country roads, and smoking a joint and listening to some music. And this was one such night. I ended up on my way home around 3 a.m., 10 minutes away from my house. I passed through the country roads, and turned back into my suburb. Keep in mind, the street I live on has over 200 houses. Turning onto a side street, I came across my first car on the drive back. It was a black SUV up ahead of me. I noticed it's traveling extremely slow with their high beam lights on. This is a suburb with streetlights everywhere, not a foggy night, etc. About 10 miles per hour. I decided to keep my distance as my right-hand turn was coming up and I would soon be clear of them. They proceeded to take the right turn up ahead that I was also going to take. I continued to follow them at a distance, as we were now on the street that I live. The eerie slow driving with the blacked out SUV and bright floodlights was already kind of freaking me out, but as I approached my house, where I park out the front against the curb, keep in mind this is a 95% empty street, with curb parking the entire way, the black SUV literally signals and pulls into my exact parking spot. I'm now approaching slowly toward my house, and they are parked completely still, lights now off. Even though I was confused as to who exactly was waiting at my house, I pulled in behind them and began to exit my car. At this moment, they accelerated hard and pulled a complete U-turn, and then sped away at high speeds with their lights off completely. I also could see in through the now open window what looked like agents of some kind, and they seemed to be taking photos of my house and of me. Really, it was just freaking weird. Even though nothing really sinister happened, the whole circumstance, the coincidence that at just that time in the morning on a completely desolate night, I would be guided home by a strange vehicle that looked and behaved as if in a movie. There's no reason I can think of that I would be target to an investigation. I've witnessed a UFO once in my life with 3 other witnesses, but that was years before this. The husband and I had the local security company install inside and outside cameras when we moved. Our 2-plus-year-old son had an obsession with opening doors, so we thought we would install one camera in the living room for peace of mind. The camera is behind the couch, close to the corner where I sit and knit, cross-stitch, etc. You can see most of the room still, and you can see when someone enters it. It's installed high enough that even if you crawl, we can still see you. So, I'm sitting there attempting to knit a hat. It's about 11 p.m. Hubby and son are in bed, but I'm feeling wide awake still. I'm geeking out at how terrible the hat looks. Frustrated, but it did look terrible. I remember thinking, I'll decide tomorrow whether to finish this disaster. I throw it in my basket next to the couch and leave to go get ready for bed. Next morning, the son goes to Granny's. My husband and I decide to wake and bake after brunch, getting ready to eat some gummies. I'm like, oh, would you bring my knitting project, because that would be bomb to knit while stoned. He brings it out and I'm dumbfounded. He hands me a fully completed hat. It was almost perfect. I was shocked. Has he learned how to knit and then knit better than me? I asked him all this and more, and he swore that I was losing it and that he would never, ever, ever even have the desire to knit. So I'm like, okay, what happens when I look at our living room camera? And he was like, yeah, do it, because you're wrong, I didn't touch it. Security cameras from 11 p.m. the previous night showed me throw the hat out of camera view. It's a little basket by the end of the couch, blocked from view, but you can see the carpet beyond that. Even if he crawled to the basket to knit it, put it back, I would have seen him enter the room. There's no possible way to get in without me seeing you. So I watch the entire thing sped up. Doesn't jump, just moves at like 16 times speed. He never enters the room once in the 10 hours of footage I watched. Not once. Our son never enters the room. I never enter the room after I leave at 11 p.m. And yet there I was, holding a fully finished hat. On the security camera before I set it down, you can literally see me chuckling to myself at what a disaster it is. And I had not finished it. I accused him of tampering with the footage. He obviously could see that I was frantic and freaking out. And he's like, okay, maybe you did finish it, blah, blah, blah. I tell my husband all about this Reddit page, and I'm like, oh, crap. Check the carbon monoxide. These people talk about hallucinogenic mold and stuff. I need an MRI, etc. Hubby is so kind. He's like, okay, if that'll make you feel better, and has a guy come to the house. He comes Monday for a carbon monoxide check, and whatever else they do. It cost us $190, but it was the best money I've ever spent. We're all good, nothing in the air that was poisonous. Okay, brain tumor, that's it. So I got into my doctor around 2 months later, March of 2019, told him the story. He doesn't want to order an MRI, but instead sends me to a psychiatrist. Fast forward to May of 2020, I hit my head on a rock while exiting a boat, bled a little, and then needed an MRI. No tumor. In fact, I'm very healthy. So, what the hell? I know I didn't knit that hat. To this day, I cannot knit even half as well as the bottom of the hat was. It was completed when he handed it to me. A few pieces of yarn needed to be trimmed, but that was it. I didn't knit that freaking hat. Do I still have the hat? No. It became a point of contention between my husband and I. Long story short, I didn't want to take it to Goodwill, and I burnt it in our fire pit instead. Avada Kedavra hat. A few years ago, I made a pen pal from another state through a website. We talked a lot, with very extensive and specific letters, for about a year and some months. She told me about her childhood, her high school experience, and what she was going through at the time. Her family, her house, her city, everything. One day, she tells me that she was going on a vacation and couldn't send letters, so she sends me her Instagram in case of an emergency, or if I wanted to talk to her. Honestly, I had tried to find her before on social media, but her name and surname were too common. We were very close, and I didn't like talking to my pen pals on social media, but one day I wanted to tell her about an accomplishment I had made. I go to the user she sent me, but it didn't seem very active. She had no bio, no profile picture, and only one photo. I recognize her face because we sent pictures of each other. I open the photo and see that it was from 2016, and it had so many comments. Weird, she had almost no followers. I thought maybe this isn't her main account anymore, but then I opened the comments. She was dead. Her comments were family members and friends she talked to me about. They were all giving their condolences and saying how much they missed her. I didn't know what to think, so I try and look up what happened to her. Apparently, someone had murdered her in early 2017, the year we started writing to each other. Thinking it was a bad joke, how could it be? Maybe she made it all up. I keep on writing letters as if nothing happened. I asked her specifically about 2017, though, if it was a good year or not. She tells me a lot of things that happened that year, and that she went out with a creepy guy for a while. I don't write her anymore after that and haven't received any letters from her, but this still haunts me. And I still don't understand what the hell happened there. The OP actually did add an update. After everyone told me that I was talking to the murderer, I got very freaked out. That never even crossed my mind, so I did some research and found out that they had two suspects. Her boyfriend and stepmother. And they both went to jail in 2018. But they released the stepmother a while later and closed the case, saying the boyfriend did it. He got many years, so he must still be in prison, hopefully. His name or face isn't public, of course, so I couldn't know for sure if he was free, but he probably isn't. Anyway, someone said it could have been a family member or friend not knowing how to cope, and I think that might be the most logical answer. I really felt like I was talking to her the whole time, though, but it could be that. I should do something more, try to reach out to someone who knew her, but it low-key scares me. Another clarification, the webpage we met through asks for ID pictures and a bunch of other stuff for security measures. It's designed for teenagers, and they don't want you to get catfished. So this happened yesterday in the afternoon. I was sitting with my family in my parents' room, just chilling and spending time, when my mother told me to go to the balcony. The balcony is connected to my parents' room, and lay the broomstick down as it was erected straight up against the wall. Here in my home country, there is a superstitious belief that broomsticks should never be kept straight up, as they cause fights. The broomstick was kept in such a manner that it was visible from the bed as the curtains were open. My mother tells me to go lay the broomstick down on the floor, and I do so. I get up, and before I walk toward the balcony, I clearly remember my mother telling me to be careful, and the floor was wet. Keeping her warning in mind, I opened the balcony door and maneuvered over the wet areas and laid the broomstick down. Then shut the balcony door and joined my family in their conversation. Now, here's the twist. About 10 to 15 minutes later, my housemaid comes to my parents' room to inform us that she is done for the day and is leaving. And before she left my mother, she said this: "Don't leave the broomstick erected against the wall, always lay it down." It was all normal until my maid responded saying that. "Oh, I'm sorry, should I pick it up?" And my mother said, "No, it's fine, I'll ask my daughter, me, to do it." Freaked out, I turned to see that the very broom I had laid down was once again erected up against the wall. Alarmed, I exclaimed that I had just laid the broomstick down, so how was it back up again? Only to be met with the response, "No, you never laid it down." I was so freaked out. I asked my family over and over again that, are you guys playing a prank on me? Only to be met with genuine denial to the claim. I really don't know what to make of this. I first considered that my maid would have gone to the balcony, and that isn't really possible because she would have had to have gone through my parents' room to get into the balcony. According to my family, I only laid the broomstick down once, but in my memory, I did it twice. When I questioned my mother, asking her if she remembered telling me to be careful of the wet floor, only for her to tell me that she never said anything like that. I'm really confused and really don't know what to make of this. Have any of you ever experienced anything like this, or even remotely similar? I would really appreciate your thoughts, theories, or suggestions on this. This is probably the single most weirdest thing that has ever happened to me, and I still can't understand it. But both me and my friend experienced it. It was at some point at the end of 2018 or the start of 2019. I can't pinpoint when exactly, but I remember the cold winter weather in the UK, and me and my best friend were on the train to a shopping center we decided to visit, as we were too young to drive. The legal age to drive here is 17. We were 15 at this point, and I'm 17 now. Anyways, we reached the station before the shopping center station, and as we were passing the midpoint of both stations and heading closer to the shopping center, the air grew thick and everything around me felt more faint and dim. I sat in silence for almost a minute, and then me and my mate just look at each other, both scared, and I say, "What the hell is happening?" He replied, "I don't know, but that felt really weird." We both were creeped out and then just shrugged it off, thinking we were tired, but afterwards everything felt different. This feeling continued. I'd travel somewhere that I've been before and it just feels different. Like it's changed how I remember things before. I never felt this feeling before this weird moment on the train, but I recall looking out the window like, has everything changed, and just feeling like the world was completely different. It wasn't just me who felt like something weird and downright scary happened, as I could see the concern on my mate's face, and he was really creeped out. He spoke about it later, mentioning how weird that event on the train was and how he felt weirded out about it. I don't quite know what happened that day, but ever since then, things have just felt different. This happened in Yorkshire, if anyone wants to know. I really don't know what to think or how to explain what I'm about to say. I'm middle-aged from Iowa, married with 3 kids, and I've been working from home due to COVID. I sprawl out at the kitchen table with my laptop. Every now and then, I get up and go out the sliding door to the deck to stretch my legs. Our house is on a corner lot, with the road to the right ending in an immediate cul-de-sac. There is a house immediately behind us, but the cul-de-sac is on the right. I just happened to look right this time. My neighbor's house on the right side was normal, and then flickered. I really don't know how to explain it. The house was as it always was, and then it flickered and the bottom left side of the house was normal, and the top right was green with white architectural lines coming off the points. The transition was cubes, so the bottom left was normal, then multicolored cubes, and then an architectural drawing for the top right. I just kept staring at the house, trying to figure out what I was seeing. Then the sky turned from a blue to a green. The best way to explain the sky is when you look at something curved, you know it's curved because of the shadowing. That's how the sky looked. Curved from behind the house to up and over the house. I felt like it was inside of a dome. The house site was about 5 seconds after the flicker, and then another second or two of the dome. I remember looking up and then to the left, and then a flicker, and then again, suddenly everything was normal. I know this sounds crazy, but I really don't know what to think. This just happened a couple of days ago. My friend sent me a link to an article about glitches in the Matrix, and I found this sub. Compared to other stories posted here, this one is tiny, even trivial. A few years back, during the course of one of my work meetings, I somehow came in possession of a good pen. What I mean by a good pen is one of those rare pens, and not particularly fancy either, that just seems to make you comfortable. It's comfortable in your hand, almost magically improves your handwriting, and seemingly has endless ink. And always makes for a perfect writing experience in the end. So this was a pen that I took great joy in using and extra care in storing. Anyway, one day I was working on something at my desk, trusty pen in hand, and I heard a strange sound come from my computer tower, located on the floor under my desk. At the moment, I started to bend down and take a look at the tower, and a powerful thought flashed through my mind. You will never see this pen again. Granted, this was one of those half thoughts that zooms by while your mind is focused on something else, the computer in my case. I put the pen down on the desk, rolled my chair back a few inches, bent over to look at the computer tower. Seeing no smoke, flames, or anything that was cause for alarm, I strengthened up and reached for my pen. Lo and behold, it was gone from the spot directly in front of me where I had put it a few seconds prior. I searched all around the desk, under papers, on my person, everywhere, to no avail. The damn pen was gone, and never seen again. I think about this small moment every so often, and to me it is a reminder that the world we live in has many, many secrets. I like to think that just as I mysteriously came into possession of it, it was now someone else's turn. I was getting out of work and my phone died. I needed to call my husband to pick me up, let's call him Tom, so I used a coworker's phone. I dialed his number, and the first time it didn't pick up. The second time, same number, it did pick up, and I'm like, oh, thank goodness he finally picked up. So here's how the conversation went. Hey Tom, I'm stuck at work. Can you please come pick me up? Who is this? Oh, my bad. I'm using a coworker's phone. It's me, my name. Can you come pick me up? Who? This is Tom, right? I then looked at the phone to see if I had the right number, and I did. And it legit sounded exactly like my husband. Yeah, this is Tom, but I don't know, my name. Tom, stop playing. Please, pick me up. I'm sorry, you have the wrong number. And then he hangs up. I ended up just waiting on a bench outside of my work until my husband noticed I wasn't home. He came to pick me up and he said he didn't even get a call, like no ringing or anything. I checked his phone and it had 2 missed calls and 2 voicemails from my coworker's number. I listened to them, but they were just blank. It could have been a technical issue, but it appeared on his phone. I don't know, I can't really make sense of it, and I hope it fits on the sub. The first time this happened was about a year or two. My dad and I were driving home from someplace. I can't remember where, but that doesn't matter. We had just gone around a roundabout, and were passing under a street lamp. It was pretty late, so it was dark outside, and all the lights in the car were off, but we had the brightest headlights on because of the dark, empty roads. Right after we passed a street lamp, everything went dark, like pitch black. We couldn't see anything even if it was an inch from our eyes, meaning that the headlights and street lamps would have had to have gone out at the exact same time, but I very highly doubt that. A second later, everything was back to normal. I looked at my dad in confusion, and he looked as confused as me. I asked what happened, and he had no idea. The second time, and most recent time this happened, was like a month ago. This time we were driving to pick something up, and it was pretty bright out, but the sun had begun to set. The headlights were on, of course, but the lights on the car were off. We were driving on the freeway with other cars around, and then there was a flash of darkness that just flew over the car, completely pitch black. We couldn't see anything. It was almost like being blind. This has been happening for a few weeks now, and I can never tell if I'm dreaming. I'm afraid that if I have dreamt this, my brain might be messed up in some way. A little background: my bedroom has 2 walls that are mostly windows. One window wall faces my fence, and the other faces the street. On one side of the street is my neighborhood, and on the other side of my street is a public field that people usually use for walking their dogs or playing with their kids. The first time I saw it, and I say it because I genuinely can't tell the gender of this child, I was staying up late doing homework. I thought I heard a car screeching and it sounded broken, so I moved the curtain aside and looked at the street to make sure I didn't need to call 911. And that's when I saw it. I was fully awake at this time, but I thought my eyes might be playing tricks on me since I had been on the laptop for hours. Standing there on the cusp of the sidewalk where the field stops was what looked like a small child, no older than maybe 5. The first thing that I noticed was the legs. They were backwards, and not only that, they were severely deformed. It looked almost like a horse had broken its hind legs and then added human feet. The second thing I noticed was that this thing was stark naked, sort of. You couldn't see any features of anything. It had no face, shoulder-length hair, and a pair of seriously messed up legs. I should note that I live in a small neighborhood, and know, more or less, everyone's family dynamic. And no one in this neighborhood has a child that fits that description even remotely. When I went to look back at it, it was gone. The second time I saw it, I was woken up out of a deep sleep due to a really unnatural sounding scream. I looked over and my sister was fast asleep, so I assumed it was just a dream. However, I somehow felt the need to look out the window and I saw it again. This time it was facing away from me, but was now in the middle of the street. I blinked a few times, but by my 6th blink it was gone. The last time I saw it was a few nights ago. I went to bed fairly early and was disoriented when I woke up, to say the least. It was around 2:30 a.m., and I sat up in bed only to see it once again, except this time it stayed for longer than the other 2 times. Still facing away from me, I was terrified. It looked like it was breathing really hard, as if it had been running. I rushed to grab my phone, which was charging at the foot of my bed. It's the only outlet on my side of the room, and by the time I opened the camera app, it was gone. I'd like to know if anyone has any similar experiences. This is seriously freaking me out, and I've been telling myself it's just a dream, even though I've been well awake for at least 2 of those instances. Any help is greatly appreciated. Okay, so I'm gonna make this kinda to the point because it's late and spooky vibes and all. In the summer of 2018, I went with a close friend, my father, and my brother on a cruise from NYC to the Bahamas, the Norwegian Gem. The way our cabin was positioned was when you walk, there's a bed on the left and right, and a bunk on the top right, and a pull-out in the middle. About 3 nights into the cruise, at around 4 a.m., I woke up. I was sleeping on the tall bunk, and I saw a tall, dark figure with no features facing straight at all of us. I couldn't see any ears or face or anything, but if I could guess the height, it was about 6 foot 2 inches. I sat there for what felt like 20 minutes just staring at this figure. We were in after a night of some heavy drinking, so I wasn't sure if I was just messed up or not. But next morning at the breakfast, I'm talking to my friend, and I was like, yo, I was up last night and saw this tall, dark figure in our room. And the moment I said that, his eyes widened, and he said he saw the same thing. He just didn't know if it was legit or not, or if he was dreaming. Fast forward about 10 minutes, and my brother rolls by at the breakfast, and we run over to him and ask him if he saw anything weird last night. We made sure not to say what it looked like or anything like that, just to test his validity, and he said, "Yeah, I woke up last night and saw this dark shadow at the foot of our beds." After we heard this, we were completely freaking out. That being, or entity, staring straight at me 2 foot away, and the fact that we all saw it on the same night, and then described the same figure, still creeps me out to this day. I did a little research afterward, and read about shadow people, but I didn't come to any crazy conclusions. Still an odd anomaly that I will always remember. Do let me know if you guys had anything similar, or know anything. Thanks. I wasn't sure where to post this, but I thought this might be a start and might give me some answers or advice. This has been going on for almost a month. A little info about me: I live in the mountains of eastern Kentucky, and I love cryptids and anything to do with them. For fun, me and my friends would ride around old trails and gravel roads looking for scary stuff. Stupid, I know. About a month ago, I started having nightmares, if you could call them that. In my dream, I'm standing in a field at night. The field is covered by a nice moonlight, but on the other side of the field I can see something standing there looking at me. It's a tall humanoid creature with grayish black skin, a distorted face, and large claws. I just stand there looking at it, and it's looking at me, neither of us moving, and then I wake up. When I wake up after my dream, I can smell rot. I chalked it up to being my old house, but I can smell it at my friend's house too when I stay there. I've had the dream going on a month now, but tonight I was over at my friend's house, and while I was there, we had a small storm, so there were lots of branches on the road. So on my drive home, I had to come to a stop to navigate a branch in the road, and I looked out my window and across the field, and I saw it. The thing from my dream was just standing there and watching me. It was like my dream in real life, except I was in my vehicle. I'm not really sure what to do or where to go from here, so I thought I'd post this here to see if anyone else had encounters like these. I've had a couple strange things happen while out with friends, if anyone's interested as well. Thanks for reading and stay safe. Reading through this subreddit made me remember this strange old memory from when I was younger that I've never really thought about until now. In all honesty, I'm not even sure if this memory was real or a dream, but it felt very realistic and had me thinking about it for days. This all happened around 5 years ago. So I live in the middle of nowhere on a dead-end dirt road, surrounded by woods in all directions, but I did have a bunch of neighbors. One night, I had randomly woken up at what I believe was 5 or 6 a.m. I remember hearing birds chirping and the sun just barely starting to come up. My bed was across from a window that looked toward the road. When I looked out the window, I saw this woman-looking figure standing near the edge of the road. She was facing away from me, and at first I thought it was just a neighbor out really early, but even that would be super strange because the figure was basically in my backyard, and it was really early. But then I noticed that her skin was gray. She also had black hair that looked like it was pulled back into a ponytail. She also had a very vivid red shirt on, and I don't think she was wearing pants. I watched her just stand there for what seemed like forever. The weird thing is that I don't remember being scared at all. Then she finally moved. She turned around for a split second and I got to see her face for a moment. She had no normal human facial features, just lots of dark, sunken-looking holes all over her face of various sizes. It looked like one of those trypophobia images. I only got to look for a split second, and then she began walking down the street, and soon I couldn't see her. I must have fallen back asleep quickly because the next thing I knew it was morning and she wasn't there. Before I get into this last story, the story is actually written by the owners of the Hollow Sky podcast, which I will link to in the description of this video, so please do consider checking that out. Give them some love, and I think you guys would actually like their podcast since they do a lot of this stuff. Hollow Sky podcast is a podcast that dives into the unexplained, or at least that's what their Twitter bio says. Sorry, guys. Yeah, just give it a check. Check it out. I think you guys would like it. There's a link tree in the description for all their stuff. Let them know that Raven sent you if you listen to them. It won't do anything for me, but, you know, that's all. Anyway, yeah, check it out, guys. All right, on to the story. I'm not too sure where to cross-post this, but I felt like this is probably the best subreddit for my story. I'm not 100% sure that what we witnessed were mimics, but it definitely felt like something else pretending to be human. I know we've had other strange encounters, but these two specifically stand out in my mind, and have both happened within the past month. My boyfriend and I are travelers and live in our van. I'm from upstate New York, and he's from Manhattan. I've been living like this for over 5 years now, and have seen a lot. One of the best parts about this lifestyle is the people you get to meet from all walks of life all over the world. Needless to say, we have a lot of exposure to different people, and we aren't easily scared by strange behavior or differences. A lot of the time we will camp in national forests, but there are also plenty of nights we spend in Walmart parking lots, and Home Depots, and just anywhere we can find with overnight street parking. The latter has brought us to some sketchy areas where other homeless people camp in bum camps and whatnot, and obviously hardcore drug use in some of these areas is a very real thing. With that being said, a few weeks ago we were kicking it in Denver and went downtown to the Rhino district off of Nevermore, I believe, and we're looking at the murals and street art and taking pictures, and generally just chilling. It was almost midnight, and we ended up in an alley behind an old Catholic church, when we saw the feet and blankets of someone sleeping in a doorway. Now, as another person on the street, even though I don't live the exact same lifestyle as people who have to sleep in super public places like that, I still empathize as much as possible and try to give them respect and privacy. Like, I don't grill them while they're laying there because I can imagine how uncomfortable and demeaning that would be to wake up to. So as we begin to pass this person, I keep it in the forefront of my mind not to stare, and I prepare myself that they may be asleep or might be awake and looking at us and not to get startled. This person was laying in a maybe 3-foot indent in front of an entrance to an old factory behind this Catholic church. No matter how prepared I tried to get myself, and no matter how much exposure I have to other people on the street, I could not help but get a surge of adrenaline and fear as we passed by this lady. As we got closer, I glanced over and she was sitting up, slouched in the corner, looking right at us. To me, she looked like she could have been native or Hispanic. Her skin was a mix of brown and gray, and she had long, tangled black hair. But what I remember most is her eyes. They were huge and bugged out and seemed like they were painfully strained, and you could see her lips pull back to show her teeth effortlessly. She had a blank expression on her face the whole time we walked by. I feel like this is a good place to mention that after spending time on the West Coast, you get crazy accustomed to tweakers and general meth addicts. You can usually tell when someone has lost themselves to meth, and it is a special kind of crazy, but crazy all the same. You can feel when someone has lost themselves to this drug, and the decaying and neglect of their bodies is very apparent. With that being said, this woman didn't give off druggy vibes. She didn't look ill and frail because of drug use, and she didn't seem to be fueled by drugs. She genuinely looked sick, like terminally ill type sick. The most messed up part of this is what she said to us as we walked by, though. Shane was on my left side, my little husky was clipped to me in between us, and this lady was sitting on the ground to my right. As we passed by and I noticed she was making eye contact, I gave her a soft, gentle smile and looked down. I don't know what Shane did to her as far as facial expressions and acknowledgement goes, but as we started to pass her, she says in a soft, serious voice with no inflection at all, "What is it called when you don't believe in God anymore?" And Shane quickly responded, "I think that's agnostic," and we kept on walking. As soon as we got out of earshot, I was like, "Shane, what the hell, why did that scare me so much?" And he was like, "You're okay, it was just a homeless person, it's no big deal. I had a feeling she was going to scare you though, but it's okay." And we kept walking down the alley. At this point, I let Boppy, my husky, off her clip so she could walk on her own, and she just followed behind us quietly. She never barked throughout the whole ordeal or acted scared at all. She's losing her eyesight a bit, but I have seen it heighten her other senses, and she knows when things are messed up, or if someone wants to hurt us, and will bark or go into defense mode. She went through this whole encounter with nothing. We leave the alley and are in front of these old apartment buildings that remind us of something you'd see in New York or even New Orleans, totally project looking, almost shotgun houses, and completely out of place for gentrified-ass Denver. We saw them as we drove by before this happened, and instantly felt drawn to them, because they were so out of place. There was a kid jungle gym type thing that they could crawl on placed on top of a bush in front of the house, which was distinct, but we didn't mention it until later, and there was a haze of a flashing TV screen and someone screaming in one of the houses through an open door. And this was all across the street from that old, ominous Catholic church. It was just the dark alley, the lady, the creepy church, the foreign houses, the supposed presence of children, and the soft, hazy lighting from the streetlight above that was such a mind screw that we felt like we weren't even in Denver anymore. Or, I hate to be this guy, but like we weren't in 2020 anymore. Later on that night, we got back to the van and Shane told me that the woman actually terrified him, and that he knew I was scared but had to act like everything was okay for me so I didn't lose my shit. He said it was just as unnatural as I felt, and that he doesn't think we saw a person. When he said that, I flipped out because that's exactly what I thought too. It was unsettling how we both felt the same thing at the same time and didn't realize it until later on when we discussed the situation. Shane has a story from last night in Venice, but I'll post that in the comments later if this gets any attention. It was way too early to wake up and write all this on Reddit after last night. I really wanted to get this stuff out there and keep an eye out for similar experiences. I know I've read stories like these somewhere on here before, but I can't find them anymore. Either way, thanks for reading.